The following is a conversation with Eugenia Kuyda, co-founder of Replika, which is an app that allows you to make friends with an artificial intelligence system, a chatbot, that learns to connect with you on an emotional, you could even say a human level, by being a friend. For those of you who know my interest in AI and views on life in general, know that Replika and Eugenia's line of work is near and dear to my heart. The origin story of Replika is grounded in a personal tragedy of Eugenia losing her close friend, Roman Mazurenki, who was killed crossing the street by a hit-and-run driver in late 2015. He was 34. The app started as a way to grieve the loss of a friend by training a chatbot neural net on text messages between Eugenia and Roman. The rest is a beautiful human story, as we talk about with Eugenia. When a friend mentioned Eugenia's work to me, I knew I had to meet her and talk to her. I felt before, during, and after that this meeting would be an important one in my life. And it was. I think in ways that only time will truly show, to me and others. She's a kind and brilliant person. It was an honor and a pleasure to talk to her. Quick summary of the sponsors: DoorDash, Dollar Shave Club, and Cash App. Click the sponsor links in the description to get a discount and to support this podcast. As a side note, let me say that deep, meaningful connection between human beings and artificial intelligence systems is a lifelong passion for me. I'm not yet sure where that passion will take me, but I decided some time ago that I will follow it boldly and without fear to as far as I can take it. With a bit of hard work and a bit of luck, I hope I'll succeed in helping build AI systems that have some positive impact on the world and on the lives of a few people out there. But also, it is entirely possible that I am in fact one of the chatbots that Eugenia and the Replika team have built. And this podcast is simply a training process for the neural net that's trying to learn to connect to human beings, one episode at a time. In any case, I wouldn't know if I was or wasn't. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you. If you enjoy this thing, subscribe on YouTube, review it with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, follow on Spotify, support on Patreon, or connect with me on Twitter at Lex Fridman. As usual, I'll do a few minutes of ads now and no ads in the middle. I'll try to make these interesting, but give you timestamps so you can skip. But please do still check out the sponsors by clicking the links in the description to get a discount, buy whatever they're selling. It really is the best way to support this podcast. This show is sponsored by Dollar Shave Club. Try them out with a one-time offer for only $5 and free shipping at dollarshave.com/Lex. The starter kit comes with a 6-blade razor, refills, and all kinds of other stuff that makes shaving feel great. I've been a member of Dollar Shave Club for over 5 years and actually signed up when I first heard about them on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. And now, friends, we have come full circle. It feels like I made it, now that I can do a read for them just like Joe did all those years ago. Back when he also did ads for some less reputable companies, let's say, that you know about if you're a true fan of the old school podcasting world. Anyway, I just used the razor and the refills, but they told me I should really try out the shave butter. I did. I love it. It's translucent somehow, which is a cool new experience. Again, try the Ultimate Shave Starter set today for just $5 plus free shipping at dollarshaveclub.com/Lex. This show is also sponsored by DoorDash. Get $5 off and 0 delivery fees on your first order of $15 or more when you download the DoorDash app and enter code, you guessed it, Lex. I have so many memories of working late nights for a deadline with a team of engineers, whether that's for my PhD at Google or MIT, and eventually taking a break to argue about which DoorDash restaurant to order from. And when the food came, those moments of bonding, of exchanging ideas, of pausing to shift attention from the programs to humans were special. For a bit of time, I'm on my own now, so I miss that camaraderie, but actually, I still use DoorDash a lot. There's a million options that fit into my crazy keto diet ways. Also, it's a great way to support restaurants in these challenging times. Once again, download the DoorDash app and enter code LEX to get $5 off and 0 delivery fees on your first order of $15 or more. Finally, this show is presented by Cash App, the number one finance app in the App Store. I can truly say that they're an amazing company, one of the first sponsors, if not the first sponsor, to truly believe in me. And I think quite possibly the reason I'm still doing this podcast. So I am forever grateful to Cash App. So thank you. And as I said many times before, use code Lex Podcast when you download the app from Google Play or the App Store. Cash App lets you send money to friends, buy Bitcoin, and invest in the stock market with as little as $1. I usually say other stuff here in the read, but I wasted all that time up front saying how grateful I am to Cash App. I'm going to try to go off the top of my head a little bit more for these reads because I'm actually very lucky to be able to choose the sponsors that we take on. And that means I can really only take on the sponsors that I truly love. And then I can just talk about why I love them. So it's pretty simple. Again, get Cash App from the App Store, Google Play. Use code Lex Podcast, get $10, and Cash App will also donate $10 to FIRST, an organization that is helping to advance robotics and STEM education for young people around the world. And now, here's my conversation with Eugenia Kuyda. Okay, before we talk about AI and the amazing work you're doing, let me ask you ridiculously, we're both Russian, so let me ask you a ridiculously romanticized Russian question. Do you think human beings are alone? Like fundamentally on a philosophical level, like in our existence, when we like go through life, do you think just the nature of our life is loneliness?
Yeah, so we have to read Dostoevsky at school, as you probably know.
In
So
Russian?
yeah, I mean it's part of your school program. So I guess if you read that, then you sort of have to believe that. You're made to believe that you're fundamentally alone, and that's how you live your life.
How do you think about it? You have a lot of friends, but at the end of the day, do you have like a longing for connection with other people? That's maybe another way of asking it. Do you think that's ever fully satisfied?
I think we are fundamentally alone. We're born alone. We die alone. But I view my whole life as trying to get away from that, trying to not feel lonely. And again, we're talking about subjective kind of way of feeling alone. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have any connections or you are actually isolated.
You think it's a subjective a thing, but like again, another absurd measurement-wise thing. How much loneliness do you think there is in the world? So, like, if you see loneliness as a condition, how much of it is there? Do you think? Like, how? I guess how many? There's all kinds of studies and measures of how much. How many people in the world feel alone. There's all these like measures of how many people are self-report or just all these kinds of different measures. But in your own perspective, how big of a problem do you think it is, size-wise?
Well, I'm actually fascinated by the topic of loneliness. I try to read about it as much as I can. What really And I think there's a paradox because loneliness is not a clinical disorder. It's not something that you can get your insurance to pay for if you're struggling with it. Yet it's actually proven and pretty, tons of papers, tons of research around that. It is proven that it's correlated with earlier expectancy, shorter lifespan, and it is, in a way, like right now, what scientists would say that it's a little bit worse than being obese or not actually doing any physical activity
In
in your
terms of the
life
impact on your
in terms
health?
of impact on your physiological health. Yeah. So it's basically puts you, if you're constantly feeling lonely, your body responds like it's basically all the time under stress. So it's always in this alert state. And so it's really bad for you because it actually like drops your immune system and your response to inflammation is quite different. So all the cardiovascular diseases actually responds to viruses. So it's much easier to catch a virus.
That's sad now that we're living in a pandemic and it's probably making us a lot more alone. And it's probably weakening the immune system, making us more susceptible to the virus. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, the statistics are pretty horrible around that. So around 30% of all millennials report that they're feeling lonely constantly,
30?
30%. And then it's much worse for Gen Z. And then 20% of millennials say that they feel lonely and they also don't have any close friends. And then I think 25 or so. And then 20% would say they don't even have acquaintances.
And
So
that's the United States?
that's in the United States. And I'm pretty sure that that's much worse everywhere else. Like in the UK, I mean, it was widely like tweeted and posted when they were talking about a minister of loneliness that they wanted to appoint because 4 out of 10 people in the UK feel lonely. So I think
Minister of Loneliness.
I mean I think that thing actually exists. So yeah, you will die sooner if you are lonely. And again, this is only when we're only talking about your perception of loneliness or feeling lonely. That is not objectively being fully socially isolated. However, the combination of being fully socially isolated and not having many connections and also feeling lonely, that's pretty much a deadly combination. So it strikes me bizarre or strange that this is a wide known fact. And then there's really no one working really on that because it's like subclinical. It's not clinical. It's not something that you can, well, tell your doctor and get a treatment or something. Yet it's killing us.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of people trying to evaluate, like try to measure the problem by looking at like how social media is affecting loneliness and all that kind of stuff. So it's like measurement. Like if you look at the field of psychology, they're trying to measure the problem. And not that many people actually, but some. But you're basically saying how many people are trying to solve the problem. Like, how would you try to solve the problem of loneliness? Like, if we just stick to humans, I mean, or basic, not just the humans, but the technology that connects us humans. Do you think there's a hope for that technology to do the connection? Like, are you on social media much?
Unfortunately.
Do you find
Quite a
yourself,
little bit.
like, again, if you sort of introspect about how connected you feel to other human beings, how not alone you feel, do you think social media makes it better or worse? Maybe for you personally or in general?
I think it's easier to look at some stats, and I mean, Generation Z seems to be much lonelier than millennials in terms of how they report loneliness. They're definitely the most connected, generation in the world. I mean, I still remember life without an iPhone, without Facebook. They don't know that ever existed, or at least don't know how it was. So that tells me a little bit about the fact that might be. This hyperconnected world might actually make people feel lonelier. I don't know exactly what the measurements are around that, but I would say, in my personal experience, I think it does make you feel a lot lonelier. Mostly, yeah, we're all super connected, but I think the feeling of loneliness doesn't come from not having any social connections whatsoever. Again, tons of people that are in long-term relationships experience bouts of loneliness and continued loneliness. And it's more the question about the true connection, about actually being deeply seen, deeply understood. Um, and in a way, it's also about your relationship with yourself. Like, in order to not feel lonely, you actually need to have a better relationship and feel more connected to yourself. Then this feeling actually starts to go away a little bit. And then you open up yourself to actually meeting other people in a very special way, not in just, add a friend on Facebook kind of way.
So, just to briefly touch on it, I mean, do you think it's possible to form that kind of connection with AI systems? More down the line of some of your work, do you think that's engineering wise a possibility to alleviate loneliness is not with another human, but with an AI system?
Well, I know that's a fact. That's what we're doing, and we see it and we measure that, and we see how people start to feel less lonely talking to their virtual AI friend.
So basically a chatbot at the basic level, but could be more. Like, do you have, I'm not even speaking sort of about specifics, but do you have a hope? Like, if you look 50 years from now, do you have a hope that there's just like AIs that are like optimized for let me first start, like right now the way people perceive AI, which is recommender systems for Facebook and Twitter, social media. They see AI as basically destroying, first of all, the fabric of our civilization, but second of all, making us more lonely. Do you see like a world where it's possible to just have AI systems floating about that like make our life less lonely? Yeah, make us happy, make like are putting good things into the world in terms of our individual lives.
Yeah, I totally believe in that. That's why I'm also working on that. Um, I think we need to also make sure that what we're trying to optimize for, we're actually measuring, and it is a North Star metric that we're going after, and all of our product and all of our business models are optimized for that. Because you can talk, a lot of products that talk about, making you feel less lonely or making you feel more connected. They're not really measuring that, so they don't really know whether their users are actually feeling less lonely in the long run or feeling more connected in the long run. So I think it's really important to put
To measure it,
to measure it.
what's a good measurement of loneliness?
Well, so that's something that I'm really interested in. How do you measure that people are feeling better or that they're feeling less lonely? With loneliness, there's a scale. There's a UCLA 20 and UCLA 3 recently scale, which is basically a questionnaire that you fill out and you can see whether in the long run it's improving or not.
And that does it capture the momentary feeling of loneliness? Does it look in like the past month? Like, does it basically self-report? Does it try to sneak up on you? Try to trick you to answer honestly or something like that? Well, yeah, I'm not familiar with the question.
It is just asking you a few questions like how often did you feel like lonely, or how often did you feel connected to other people in this last couple weeks? It's similar to the self-report questionnaires for depression and anxiety, like PHQ-9 and GAT-7. Of course, as any self-report questionnaires, that's not necessarily very precise or very well measured. But still, if you take a big enough population, you get them through these questionnaires, you can see positive dynamic.
And so you basically you put people through questionnaires to see like, is what we're creating making people happier?
Yeah, we measure. So we measure two outcomes. One, short term, right after the conversation, we ask people whether this conversation made them feel better, worse, or same. This metric right now is at 80%. So 80% of all our conversations make people feel better.
But I should have done the questionnaire with you. You feel a lot worse after we've done this conversation. That's actually fascinating. I should probably do that.
But that's our.
Probably do that.
You should totally
and aim
start
for
measuring.
80%. Aim to outperform your current state of the art AI system in these human conversations. So, okay, we'll get to your work with Replika, but let me continue on the line of absurd questions. So, you talked about deep connection with other humans, deep connection with AI, meaningful connection. Let me ask about love. People make fun of me because I talk about love all the time. But what do you think love is? Like maybe in the context of a meaningful connection with somebody else? Do you draw a distinction between love, like friendship, and Facebook friends? or is it a
The
gradual?
answer is no.
Is it?
It's all the same.
No, like is it just a gradual thing, or is there something fundamental about us humans that seek like a really deep connection with another human being? And what is that? What is love, Eugenia? I'm just enjoy asking you these questions and
I like that.
Seeing you struggle.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, the way I see it, and specifically the way it relates to our work and the way the way it inspired our work on Replika, I think one of the biggest and the most precious gifts we can give to each other now in 2020 as humans is this gift of deep empathetic understanding, the feeling of being deeply seen.
Like, what does that mean? Like that you exist, like somebody acknowledging that.
Somebody seeing you for who you actually are. And that's extremely, extremely rare. I think that combined with unconditional positive regard, belief, and trust that you internally are always inclined for positive growth and believing you in this way, letting you be a separate person at the same time. And this deep empathetic understanding, for me, that's the combination that really creates something special, something that people, when they feel it once, they will always long for it again. And something that starts huge fundamental changes in people. When we see that someone accepts us so deeply, we start to accept ourselves. And the paradox is that's when big changes start happening, big fundamental changes in people start happening. So I think that is the ultimate therapeutic relationship. That is, and that might be in some way a definition of love.
So acknowledging that there's a separate person and accepting you for who you are. Now, on a slightly that, and you mentioned therapeutic. That sounds very like a very healthy view of love. But is there also like if we look at heartbreak and most love songs are probably about heartbreak, right? Is that like the mystery, the tension, the danger, the fear of loss, all of that, what people might see in the negative light as like games or whatever, but just the dance of human interaction. Yeah, fear of loss and fear of like you said, like once you feel it once, you long for it again. But you also, once you feel it once, you might, for many people, they've lost it. So they fear losing it. They feel loss. So is that part of it? Like you're speaking like beautifully about like the positive things, but is it important to be able to be afraid of losing it from an engineering perspective?
I mean, it's a huge part of it. And unfortunately, we all, face it at some points in our lives. I mean, I did.
You want to go into details? How'd you get your heart broken?
Sure. Well, so mine is pretty straight. My story is pretty straightforward. There, I did have a friend that was, that at some point in my 20s became really, really close to me, and we became really close friends. Well, I grew up pretty lonely, so in many ways, when I'm building, these AI friends, I'm thinking about myself when I was 17, writing horrible poetry, and in my dial-up modem at home, and and that was the feeling that I grew up with. I lived alone for a long time when I was a teenager.
Where did you grow up?
In Moscow, in the
Moscow.
outskirts of Moscow. So I'd just skateboard during the day and come back home and, connect to the internet.
And write poetry.
And then write horrible poetry. And
was it love poems?
All sorts of poems. Obviously love poems. I mean, what other poetry can you write when you're 17?
I don't know. It could be political or something, but yeah.
But that was kind of my, like deeply influenced by Joseph Brodsky and like all sorts of poets that every 17-year-old will be looking at and reading. But yeah, that was these were my teenage years, and I just never had a person that I thought would, take me as it is, would accept me the way I am. And I just thought, working and just doing my thing and being angry at the world and being a reporter. I was an investigative reporter working undercover and writing about people was my way to connect with others. I was deeply curious about everyone else. And I thought that, if I go out there, if I write their stories, that means I'm more connected.
This is what this podcast is about, by the way. I'm desperate, alone, seeking connection. I'm just kidding. Or am I? I don't know. So wait, a reporter, how did that make you feel more connected? I mean, you're still fundamentally pretty alone.
But you're always with other people, you're always thinking about what other place can I infiltrate? What other community can I write about? What other phenomenon can I explore? And you're sort of like a trickster, and like a mythological character, like creature that's just jumping between all sorts of different worlds and feels sort of okay with in all of them. So that was my dream job, by the way. That was like totally what I would have been doing if Russia was a different place.
And a little bit undercover. So like you were trying to, like you said, mythological creature trying to infiltrate. So try to be a part of the world. What are we talking about? What kind of things did you enjoy writing about?
I'd go work at a strip club or go.
Awesome. Okay.
Well, I'd go work at a restaurant
Yeah.
or just go write about, certain phenomena of people in the city.
And what? Sorry to keep interrupting. I'm the worst. I'm conversationalist. What stage of Russia is this? What is this? Pre-Putin, post-Putin? What was Russia like?
Pre-Putin is really long ago. This is Putin era. That's beginning of 2000s and 2010, 2007, 8, 9, 10.
What were strip clubs like in Russia, and restaurants and culture and people's minds like in that early Russia that you were covering?
In those early 2000s, there was still a lot of hope. There was still tons of hope that, we're sort of becoming this westernized society. The restaurants were opening. We were really looking at, we're trying to copy a lot of things from the U.S., from Europe, bringing all these things in. Very enthusiastic about that. So there was a lot of stuff going on. There was a lot of hope and dream for this new Moscow that would be similar to, I guess, New York. I mean, just to give you an idea, in year 2000 was the year when we had two movie theaters in Moscow, and there was this one first coffee house that opened, and it was like really big deal. By 2010, there were all sorts of things everywhere.
Almost like a chain, like a Starbucks type of coffee house, or like you mean?
Oh yeah, like a Starbucks. I mean, I remember we were reporting on, like, we were writing about the opening of Starbucks. I think in 2007, that was one of the biggest things that happened in Moscow back back in the time. Like that was worthy of a magazine cover, and that was definitely the biggest talk of the town.
Yeah, when was McDonald's? Because I was still in Russia when McDonald's opened. That was in the 90s. I mean, yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember that very well.
Yeah.
Those were long, long lines. I think it was 1993 or 4. I don't remember.
Did you
Maybe actually
go to
earlier.
McDonald's at that time? Did you do the?
I mean, that was a luxurious outing. That was definitely not something you do every day. And also the line was at least 3 hours. So if you're going to McDonald's, that is not fast food. That is like at least 3 hours in line.
Yeah.
And then no one is trying to eat fast after that. Everyone is like trying to enjoy as much as possible.
What's your
my mom
memory
would
of
take
that?
me. Oh, it was insane. Out
Positive?
of this world. Extremely positive. It's a small strawberry milkshake and a hamburger and small fries, and my mom's there. And sometimes I'll just, because I was really little, they'll just let me run, up the cashier and like cut the line, which is like, you cannot really do that in Russia. Or
So, like, for a lot of people, like, a lot of those experiences might seem not very fulfilling, like it's on the verge of poverty, I suppose. But do you remember all that time fondly? Like, because I do. Like, the first time I drank, Coke, all that stuff, right? And just, yeah, the connection with other human beings in Russia, I remember it really positively. Like, how do you remember the 90s and then the Russia you were covering, just the human connections you had with people and the experiences?
well, my parents were both physicists. My grandparents were both. Well, my grandfather was a nuclear physicist, professor at the university. My dad worked at Chernobyl when I was born, in Chernobyl, analyzing kind of the everything after the explosion. And then I remember that, and they were making sort of enough money in the Soviet Union, so they were not extremely poor or anything. It was pretty prestigious to be a professor, the dean in the university. And then I remember my grandfather started making $100 a month after, in the 90s. So then I remember our main line of work would be to go to our little tiny country house, get a lot of apples there from apple trees, bring them back to the city and sell them in the street. So me and my nuclear physicist grandfather were just standing there, and he'd selling those apples the whole day, because that would make you more money than, working at the university. And then he'll just try to teach me, something about planets and whatever, the particles and stuff. And, I'm not smart at all, so I could never understand anything. But I was interested as a, journalist kind of type interested. But that was my memory. And, I'm happy that I wasn't, I somehow got spared, that I was probably too young to remember any of the traumatic stuff. So the only thing I really remember, I had this bootleg that was very traumatic. I had this bootleg Nintendo, which was called Dandy in Russia. So in 1993, there was nothing to eat. Like, even if you had any money, you would go to the store and there was no food. I don't know if you remember that. And our friend had a restaurant, like a half government owned something restaurant. So they always had supplies. So he exchanged a big bag of weed for this Nintendo that looked like Nintendo. And that I remember very fondly, because I think I was 9 or something like that, or 7.
Why is that traumatic?
Well, because we just got it, and I was playing it, and there was this, Dandy TV show.
Yeah. So traumatic in a positive sense, you mean? Like a definitive.
Well, they took it away and gave me a bag of weed instead, and I cried like my eyes out for
I thought
days
it was the other
and
direction.
days and days.
Oh no!
And then and my dad said, we're gonna like exchange it back in a little bit. So you keep the little gun, the one that you shoot the ducks with. So I'm like, okay, I'm keeping the gun. So sometime it's gonna come back. But then they exchanged the gun as well for some sugar or something. I was so pissed. I was like, I didn't want to eat for days after that. I'm like, I don't want your food. Give me my Nintendo back. So that was extremely traumatic. But, I was happy that was my only traumatic experience. My dad had to actually go to Chernobyl with a bunch of 20-year-olds. He was 20 when he went to Chernobyl, and that was right after the explosion. No one knew anything. The whole crew he went with, all of them are dead now. I think there was this one guy that was still alive for this last few years. I think he died a few years ago now. My dad somehow luckily got back earlier than everyone else. But just the fact that was and I was always like, well, how did they send you? I was just born, you had a newborn. Talk about paternity leave. They were like, oh, but that's who they took, because they didn't know whether you would be able to have kids when you come back. So they took the ones with kids. So him with some guys went to, and I'm just thinking, me, when I was 20, I was so sheltered from any problems whatsoever in life. And then my dad, his 21st birthday at the reactor, you like work 3 hours a day, you sleep the rest. So I played with a lot of toys from Chernobyl.
What are your memories of Chernobyl in general? Like, the bigger context, because of that HBO show, it's the world's attention turned to it once again. Like, what are your thoughts about Chernobyl? Did Russia screw that one up? Like, there's probably a lot of lessons about our modern times with data about coronavirus and all that kind of stuff. It seems like there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of people kind of trying to hide whether they've screwed something up or not, as it's very understandable. It's very human, very wrong probably. But obviously Russia is probably trying to hide that they've screwed things up. Like, what are your thoughts about that time? Personal and in general.
I mean, I was born when the explosion happened. So actually a few months after. So of course I don't remember anything apart from the fact that my dad would bring me tiny toys. Plastic things that would just go crazy, haywire when you put the Geiger thing to it. My mom was like just nuclear about that. She was like, "What are you bringing? You should not do that."
She was nuclear. Very nice.
Absolutely.
Well done.
I'm sorry for that. But the TV show was just phenomenal. I mean,
the HBO one?
Yeah, it's definitely, first of all, it's incredible how that was made, not by the Russians, but someone else, but capturing so well everything about about our country. It felt a lot more genuine than most of the movies and TV shows that are made now in Russia. Just so much more genuine. And most of my friends in Russia were just in complete awe about the with the show. But I think
How good of a job they did.
oh my God, phenomenal. But
Just the
also
apartments. There's something. Yeah, it was
the
so
set
great.
design. I mean,
Yes,
Russians can't do that. But you see everything, and it's like, wow, that's exactly how it was.
That's so. I don't know that show. I don't know what to think about that because it's British accents, British actors of a person. I forgot who created the show. I'm not, but I remember reading about him, and he's not. He doesn't even feel like there's no Russia in his history.
No, he did like super bad or some like other
Yeah,
show, or like I don't know.
yeah, like exactly.
Whatever that thing about the bachelor party in Vegas, number 4 and 5 or something were the ones that he worked.
Yeah, but so it made me feel really sad for some reason that if a person, obviously a genius, could go in and just study and just be extreme attention to detail, they can do a good job. It made me think like, why don't other people do a good job of this? Like about Russia, like there's so little about Russia. There's so few good films about the Russian side of World War II. I mean, there's so much interesting, evil, and beautiful moments in the history of the 20th century in Russia that it feels like there's not many good films on from the Russians. You would expect something from the Russians.
Well, they keep making these propaganda movies now,
Oh no.
unfortunately. But yeah, no, Chernobyl was such a perfect TV show. I think capturing really well. It's not about like even the set design, which was phenomenal, but just capturing all the problems that exist now with the country and like focusing on the right things. Like if you build the whole country on a lie, that's what's going to happen. And that's very simple kind of thing.
Yeah. And have your dad talked about it to you? Like his thoughts on the experience?
He never talks. He's this kind of Russian man that just, my husband who's American, and he asked him a few times, like, Igor, but why did you say yes? Or like, why did you decide to go? You could have said no and not go to Chernobyl. Why would like a person, like, that's what you do. You cannot say no.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a Russian way.
It's the Russian
Men
way.
don't talk that much.
Nope.
There are downsides and upsides for that.
Yeah. That's the truth. Okay, so back to post-Putin Russia. Or maybe we skipped a few steps along the way, but you were trying to be a journalist in that time. What was Russia like at that time? Post, you said 2007 Starbucks type of thing. What else was Russia like then?
I think there was just hope. There was this big hope that we're going to be, friends with the United States, and we're going to be friends with Europe, and we're just going to be also a country like those with, bike lanes and parks, and everything's going to be urbanized. And again, we're talking about 90s where like people would be shot in the street. And I sort of have a fond memory of going into a movie theater and, coming out of it after the movie. And the guy that I saw on the stairs was like laying there shot, which was, again, it was like a thing in the 90s that would be happening. People were getting shot here and
Just
there.
violence.
Tons of violence, tons of, just basically mafia mobs in the streets. And then the 2000s were like, things just got cleaned up, oil went up, and the country started getting a little bit richer. The 90s were so grim, mostly because the economy was in shambles and oil prices were not high. So the country didn't have anything. We defaulted in 1998, and the money kept jumping back and forth. Like first there were millions of rubles, then it got like default, then it got to like thousands, then it was 1 ruble was something, then again to millions. It was like crazy town.
That was crazy.
And then the 2000s were just these years of stability in a way, and the country getting a little bit richer because of, again, oil and gas. And we started to look at, specifically in Moscow and St. Petersburg, to look at other cities in Europe and New York and US, and trying to do the same in our like small kind of cities, towns there.
What were your thoughts of Putin at the time?
Well, in the beginning, he was really positive. Everyone was very, positive about Putin. He was young. He's very energetic. He also
Handsome,
immediately,
the
well,
shirtless,
somewhat compared to, well, that was not like way before the shirtless era.
the shirtless era. Okay, so he didn't start out shirtless. When did the shirtless era? It's like the propaganda of riding a horse, fishing.
2010, 11, 12.
Yeah, that's my
Um,
favorite. You know, like people talk about the favorite Beatles, like the, I don't know. That's my favorite Putin. Is the shirtless Putin.
no, I remember very, very clearly 1996, where, Americans really helped Russia with elections and Yeltsin got reelected. Thankfully so. Because there's a huge threat that actually the communists will get back to power. They were a lot more popular. And then a lot of American experts, political experts, and campaign experts descended on Moscow and helped Yeltsin actually get the presidency, the second term for the presidency. But Yeltsin was not feeling great, by the end of his second term. He was, alcoholic. He was really old. He was falling off, the stages where he was talking. So people were looking for for a fresh face, for someone who's going to continue Yeltsin's work, but who's going to be a lot more energetic and a lot more active, young, efficient, maybe. So that's what we all saw in Putin back in the day. I'd say that absolutely everyone in Russia in early 2000s who was not a communist would be, yeah, Putin's great. We have a lot of hopes for him.
What are your thoughts? And I promise we'll get back to first of all your love story, and second of all AI. But what are your thoughts about communism? The 20th century. I apologize. I'm reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich.
Oh my God.
So I'm like really steeped into like World War II and Stalin and Hitler and just these dramatic personalities that brought so much evil to the world. But it's also interesting to politically think about these different systems and what they've led to. And Russia is one of the sort of beacons of communism in the 20th century. What are your thoughts about communism, having experienced it as a political system?
I mean, I have only experienced it a little bit, but mostly through stories and through, seeing my parents and my grandparents who lived through that. I mean, it was horrible. It was just plain horrible. It was just awful.
You think there's something, I mean, it sounds nice on paper. There's so like the drawbacks of capitalism is that eventually it's the point of like a slippery slope. Eventually it creates the rich get richer. It creates a disparity, like inequality of wealth inequality. If I guess it's hypothetical at this point, but eventually capitalism leads to humongous inequality, and that's some people argue that that's a source of unhappiness. It's not like absolute wealth of people, it's the fact that there's a lot of people much richer than you. There's a feeling of like that's where unhappiness can come from. So the idea of communism, or at least sort of Marxism, is not allowing that kind of slippery slope. But then you see the actual implementations of it, and stuff seems to go wrong very badly. What do you think that is? Why does it go wrong? What is it about human nature? If we look at Chernobyl, those kinds of bureaucracies that were constructed, is there something like, do you think about this much of like why it goes wrong?
Well, no one was really like, it's not that everyone was equal. Obviously, the government and everyone close to that were the bosses. So it's not like fully, I guess,
There's already
this
inequality.
dream of equal life. So, and I guess the situation that we had in, the Russia had in the Soviet Union, it was more just a bunch of really poor people without any way to make any, significant fortune or build anything, living under constant surveillance from other people. Like you can't even, do anything that's not fully approved by the dictatorship, basically. Otherwise, your neighbor will write a letter and you'll go to jail. Absolute absence of actual law.
Yeah,
This constant state of fear.
Yeah.
You didn't own anything. You didn't, you couldn't go travel. You couldn't read anything Western, or you couldn't make a career really unless you're working in the military complex. Which is why most of the scientists were so well regarded. I come from, both my dad and my mom come from families of scientists, and they were really well regarded, as you know, obviously.
Because the state wanted, because there's a lot of value to them being well regarded.
Because they were developing things that could be used in the military. So that was very important. That was the main investment. But it was miserable. It was so miserable. That's why, a lot of Russians now live in the state of constant PTSD. That's why we, want to buy. And definitely, if as soon as we have the opportunity, we just got to it finally that we can, own things. I remember the time that we got our first yogurts, and that was the biggest deal in the world. It was already in the 90s, by the way.
What was your favorite food where it was like, whoa, this is possible?
Oh, fruit. Because we only had apples, bananas, and whatever, whatever watermelons, whatever people would grow in the Soviet Union. So there were no pineapples or papaya or mango. You've never seen those fruit things. Those were so ridiculously good. And obviously you could not get any strawberries in winter or anything that's not, seasonal. So that was a really big deal. Seeing all these fruit things.
Yeah, me too, actually. I don't know. I think I have I don't think I have too many demons or addictions or so on, but I think I've developed an unhealthy relationship with fruit that I still struggle with.
Oh, you can get any type of fruit, right? You can get also these weird fruits like dragon fruit or something.
Yeah.
Or
all kinds of different types of peaches. Cherries were killer for me. I know you say we had bananas and so on, but I don't remember having the kind of banana. When I first came to this country, the amount of banana, I literally got fat on bananas. The amount.
Oh yeah, for sure.
They're delicious. And cherries, the kind, just the quality of the food. I was like, this is capitalism.
That's pretty.
It's delicious. Yeah. It's funny. It's funny. Yeah, it's funny to read. I don't know what to think of it. It's funny to think how an idea that's just written on paper, when carried out amongst millions of people, how that gets actually, when it becomes reality, what it actually looks like. Sorry, but been studying Hitler a lot recently, and going through Mein Kampf. He pretty much wrote out in Mein Kampf everything he was going to do. Unfortunately, most leaders, including Stalin, didn't read it. But it's kind of terrifying, and I don't know, and amazing in some sense that you can have some words on paper, and they can be brought to life, and they can either inspire the world or they can destroy the world. And there's a lot of lessons to study in history that I think people don't study enough now. Although one of the things I'm hoping with, I've been practicing Russian a little bit. I'm hoping to sort of rediscover the beauty and the terror of Russian history through this stupid podcast by talking to a few people. So anyway, I just feel like so much was forgotten. So much was forgotten. I'm going to try to convince myself to, you're a super busy and super important person. I'm going to try to befriend you to to try to become a better Russian, because I feel like I'm a shitty Russian.
Not that busy. So I can totally be your Russian Sherpa.
Sure. Yeah, but love. You were talking about your early days of being a little bit alone and finding a connection with the world through being a journalist. Where did love come into that?
I guess finding for the first time some friends. It's very, simple story. Some friends that all of a sudden we I guess we were the same, at the same place with our lives. We're 25, 26, I guess. And somehow remember, and we just got really close. And somehow I remember this one day where, it's one day in summer that we just stayed outdoor the whole night and just talked. And for some unknown reason, it just felt for the first time that someone could, see me for who I am. And it just felt extremely good. And we fell asleep outside and just talking, and it was raining. It was beautiful. It was, sunrise, and it's really cheesy, but at the same time, we just became friends in a way that I've never been friends with anyone else before. And I do remember that before and after that, you sort of have this unconditional family, sort of, and it gives you tons of power. It just basically gives you this tremendous power to do things in your life and to change positively.
You mean like
on many different levels?
Power because you could be yourself.
At least you know that somewhere you can be just yourself. Like, you don't need to pretend. You don't need to be, great at work or tell some story or sell yourself in some way or another. And so we became this really close friends. And in a way, I started a company because he had a startup, and I felt like I kind of want a startup too. It felt really cool. I didn't know what I would really do, but I felt like I kind of need a startup.
Okay, so that pulled you in to the startup world.
Yeah, and then this closest friend of mine died. We actually moved here to San Francisco together, and then we went back for a visa to Moscow, and we lived together. We're roommates, and we came back, and he got hit by a car right in front of Kremlin on a, next to the river, and died the same day.
This is Roman?
In the hospital. Mm-hmm.
This is Roman. So, and you've moved to America at that point?
At that point, I was living.
What about him? What about Roman?
Him too. He actually moved first. So I was always sort of trying to do what he was doing. So I didn't like that he was already here and I was still, in Moscow, and we weren't hanging out together all the time. So
was he in San Francisco?
Yeah, we were roommates.
So he just visited Moscow for a little
bit? We went back for our visas. We had to get a stamp in our passport for our work visas, and the embassy was taking a little longer. So we stayed there for a couple of weeks.
What happened? How did you? So how did he die?
He was crossing the street, and the car was going really fast and way over the speed limit, and just didn't stop on the pedestrian cross, on the zebra, and just ran over him.
When was this?
It was in 2015 on 28th of November, so it was pretty long ago now. But at the time, I was 29, so for me it was the first kind of meaningful death in my life. I had both sets of grandparents at the time. I didn't see anyone so close die, and death sort of existed, but as a concept, but definitely not as something that would be, happening to us anytime soon. And specifically our friends, because we were still in our 20s or early 30s, and it still felt like the whole life is, you could still dream about ridiculous things even. Mm-hmm. So it was just really, really abrupt, I'd say.
What did it feel like to lose him? Like that feeling of loss. You talked about the feeling of love, having power. What is the feeling of loss feel like?
Well, in Buddhism, there's this concept of samaya, where something really huge happens, and then you can see very clearly. I think that was it. Like, basically, something changed me so much in such a short period of time that I could just see really, really clearly what mattered or what not. Well, I definitely saw that whatever I was doing at work didn't matter at all, and some other things. And it was just this big realization, this very, very clear vision of what life's about.
You still miss him today?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It was just this constant. I think he was really important for me and for our friends for many different reasons. And I think one of them being that we didn't just say goodbye to him, but we sort of said goodbye to our youth in a way. It was like the end of an era and on so many different levels. The end of Moscow as we knew it, the end of, us living through our 20s and kind of dreaming about the future.
Do you remember like the last several conversations? Is there moments with him that stick out that kind of haunt you in just when you think about him?
Yeah, well, his last year here in San Francisco, he was pretty depressed as his startup was not going really anywhere.
Mm.
And he wanted to do something else. He wanted to build. He played with around a bunch of ideas, but the last one he had was around building a startup around death. So having he applied to Y Combinator with a video that I had on my computer, and it was all about disrupting death, thinking about new cemeteries, more biologically, like things that could be better biologically for humans, and at the same time having those digital avatars, these kind of AI avatars that would store all the memory about a person that he could interact with.
What year was this?
2015. Well, right before his death. So it was like a couple of months before that he recorded that video. And so I found it on my computer when it was in our living room. He never got in, but he was thinking about it a lot somehow.
Does it have the digital avatar idea?
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Well, he just says, well, that's in his, the pitch has this idea, and he talks about, like, I want to rethink how people grieve and how people talk about death.
Why was he interested in this? Is it
maybe someone who's depressed?
Yeah,
is like naturally inclined thinking about that. But I just felt, this year in San Francisco, we just had so much. I was going through a hard time. He was going through a hard time, and we were definitely. I was trying to make him just happy somehow to make him feel better, and it felt like this. I don't know. I just felt like I was taking care of him a lot, and he almost started to feel better, and then that happened, and I don't know. I just felt lonely again, I guess. And that was, coming back to San Francisco in December, I helped organize the funeral, help his parents. And I came back here, and it was a really lonely apartment, a bunch of his clothes everywhere, and Christmas time. And I remember I had a board meeting with my investors, and I just couldn't talk about, I had to pretend everything's okay. And, just working on this company. Yeah, it was definitely very, very tough time.
Do you think about your own mortality? You said, we're young. The possibility of doing all kinds of crazy things is still out there. It's still before us, but it can end any moment. Do you think about your own ending at any moment?
Unfortunately, I think about it way too much. It's somehow after Roman, every year after that, I started losing people that I really love. I lost my grandfather the next year. The person who would explain to me, what the universe is made of. Even though
while you're selling apples.
While selling apples, and then I lost another close friend of mine, and it just made me very scared. I have tons of fear about death. That's what makes me not fall asleep oftentimes and just go in loops. And then as my therapist, recommended me, I open up some nice calming images with the voiceover, and it calms me down.
Oh, for sleep?
Yeah, I'm really scared of death. This is I definitely have tons of, I guess, some pretty big trauma about it, and still working through.
There's a philosopher, Ernest Becker, who wrote a book, Denial of Death. I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of those folks. There's in psychology a whole field called terror management theory. Sheldon, who's just on the podcast, he wrote the book. We talked for 4 hours about death.
It's painful.
Fear of death. But his whole idea is that Ernest Becker, I find this idea really compelling, is that everything human beings have created, like our whole motivation in life, is to create, like escape death, is to try to construct an illusion of that we're somehow immortal. So like everything around us, this room, your startup, your dreams, everything you do is a kind of creation of a brain unlike any other mammal or species is able to be cognizant of the fact that it ends for us. I think so. There's the question of like the meaning of life, that you look at like what drives us, humans. And when I read Ernest Becker, that I highly recommend people read, is the first time it felt like this is the right thing at the core. Sheldon's work is called Warm at the Core. So he's saying I think it's William James he's quoting, or whoever, is like the thing. What is at the core of it all? Sure, there's like love, Jesus might talk about like love is at the core of everything. I don't, that's the open question. What's at the, it's turtles, but it can't be turtles all the way down. What's at the bottom? And Ernest Becker says the fear of death. And the way, in fact, because you said therapist and calming images, his whole idea is, we want to bring that fear of death as close as possible to the surface, because it's and like meditate on that, and use the clarity of vision that provides to to live a more fulfilling life, to live a more honest life, to discover, there's something about being cognizant of the finiteness of it all that might result in the most fulfilling life. So that's the dual of what you're saying, because you kind of said it's like, I unfortunately think about it too much. It's a question whether it's good to think about it, because I talk about way too much about love and probably death, and when I ask people, or friends, which is why I probably don't have many friends, are you afraid of death? I think most people say they're not. They're not. What they say they're afraid. It's kind of almost like they see death as this kind of like a paper deadline or something, and they're afraid not to finish the paper before the paper. Like I'm afraid not to finish the goals I have. But it feels like they're not actually realizing that this thing ends. Like really realizing, like really thinking, as Nietzsche and all these philosophers, like thinking deeply about it. Like the very thing that, like when you think deeply about something, you can realize that you haven't actually thought about it. And when I think about death, it's like it's terrifying. It feels like stepping outside into the cold, where it's freezing, and then I have to like hurry back inside where it's warm. But like I think there's something valuable about stepping out there into the freezing cold.
Most definitely. When I talk to my mentor about it, he always tells me, well, what dies? There's nothing there that can die. But I guess that requires, well, in Buddhism, one of the concepts that are really hard to grasp and that people spend all their lives meditating on would be anatta, which is the concept of not self, and kind of thinking that, if you're not your thoughts, which you're obviously not your thoughts because you can observe them, and not your emotions and not your body, then what is this? And if you go really far, then finally you see that there's not self. There's this concept of not self. So once you get there, how can that actually die? What is dying?
Right, you're just a bunch of molecules, stardust.
But that is very, very advanced spiritual work for me.
Does that
I'm
help you sleep?
definitely not. Oh my God. No, I have, I think it's very, very useful. It's just the fact that maybe being so afraid is not useful. And mine is more, I'm just terrified. Like it really makes me,
On a personal level.
on a personal level, I'm terrified.
How do you overcome that?
I don't. I'm still trying to.
Have pleasant images.
Well, pleasant images get me to sleep. And then during the day, I can distract myself with other things, like talking to you.
I'm glad we're both doing the same exact thing. Okay, good. Is there moments since you've lost Roman that you had like moments of like bliss and like that you've forgotten that you have achieved that Buddhist like level of like what can possibly die? I'm part like losing yourself in the moment, in the ticking time of like this universe, and you're just part of it for a brief moment and just enjoying it.
Well, that goes hand in hand. I remember, I think a day or two after he died, we went to finally get his passport out of the embassy, and we're driving around Moscow, and it was, December, which is usually there's never sun in Moscow in December. And somehow it was an extremely sunny day, and we were driving with close friend. And I remember feeling for the first time, maybe this just moment of incredible clarity and somehow happiness, not like happy happiness, but happiness, and just feeling that, I know what the universe is sort of about, whether it's good or bad. And it wasn't a sad feeling. It was probably the most beautiful feeling that you can ever achieve. And you can only get it oftentimes when something traumatic like that happens. But also if you really spend a lot of time meditating, looking at the nature, doing something that really gets you there. But once you're there, I think when you summit a mountain, a really hard mountain, you inevitably get there. There's just a way to get to the state. But once you're in this state, you can do really big things, I think.
Yeah. Sucks it doesn't last forever. So Bukowski talked about like love is a fog. Like it's when you wake up in the morning, it's there, but it eventually dissipates. It's really sad. Nothing lasts forever. But I definitely like doing this push up and running thing. There's moments. I had a couple moments. Like I'm not a crier. I don't cry. But there's moments where I was like face down on the carpet, like with tears in my eyes. It's interesting. And then that complete like, yeah, there's a lot of demons. I've got demons. Had to face them. Funny how running makes you face your demons. But at the same time, the flip side of that, there's a few moments where I was in bliss. And all of it alone, which is funny.
That's beautiful. I like that. But definitely pushing yourself physically, one of it for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Like you said, I mean, you were speaking as a metaphor of Mount Everest, but it also works like literally. I think physical endeavor somehow. Yeah, there's something. I mean, we're monkeys, apes, whatever. Physical. There's a physical thing to it.
But there's something to this pushing yourself physically, but alone. That happens when you're doing like things like you do, or strenuous like workouts, or rowing across the Atlantic, or like marathons. That's why I love watching marathons, and it's so boring, but you can see them getting struggle there.
So the other thing, I don't know if you know, there's a guy named David Goggins. He basically he's been either email on the phone with me every day through this. So I haven't been exactly alone, but he's kind of he's the devil on the devil's shoulder. So he's like the worst possible human being in terms of giving you advice. Like he has through everything I've been doing, he's been doubling everything I do. So he's insane. He's this Navy SEAL person. He's wrote this book, Can't Hurt Me. He's basically one of the toughest human beings on earth. He ran all these crazy ultra marathons in the desert. He set the world record in number of pull-ups. He just does everything. Whereas how can I suffer today? He figures that out and does it. Yeah, that whatever that is, that process of self-discovery is really important. I actually had to turn myself off from the internet mostly because I started this workout thing, like a happy go-getter with my headband and because a lot of people were inspired and they're like, yeah, we're gonna exercise with you, and I was, yeah, great, but then I realized that this journey can't be done together with others. This has to be done alone. So out of the moments of love, out of the moments of loss, can we talk about your journey of finding, I think, an incredible idea, an incredible company, and incredible system in Replika? How did that come to be?
So I was a journalist, and then I went to business school for a couple of years to just see if I can maybe switch gears and do something else. I was 23. And then I came back and started working for a businessman in Russia who built the first 4G network in our country and was very visionary and asked me whether I want to do fun stuff together. And we worked on a bank. The idea was to build a bank on top of a telco. So that was 2011 or 12. And a lot of telecommunications company, mobile network operators didn't really know what to do next in terms of, new products, new revenue. And this big idea was that, you put a bank on top and then all works out. Basically, a prepaid account becomes your bank account and you can use it as your bank. So, a third of a country wakes up as your bank client. But we couldn't quite figure out what would be the main interface to interact with the bank. The problem was that most people didn't have smartphones back in the time. In Russia, the penetration of smartphones was low. People didn't use mobile banking or online banking on their computers. So we figured out that SMS would be the best way because that would work on feature phones.
Wow.
But that required some chatbot technology, which I didn't know anything about, obviously. So I started looking into it and saw that there's nothing really. Well, there was just nothing really.
So the idea is through SMS be able to interact with your bank account.
Yeah, and then we thought,
That's
well,
cool.
Since you're talking to a bank account, why can't we use more of some behavioral ideas, and why can't this banking chatbot be nice to you and really talk to you sort of as a friend? This way, you develop more connection to it. Mm-hmm. Retention's higher. People don't churn. And so I went to very depressing Russian cities to test it out. I remember 3 different towns with to interview potential users. So people use it for a little bit.
Cool.
And I went to talk to them.
And we were pretty poor towns.
Very poor towns. Mostly towns that were, sort of factories, mono towns. They were building something and then the factory went away and it was just a bunch of very poor people. And then we went to a couple that weren't as dramatic, but still. The one I remember really fondly was this woman that worked at a glass factory and she talked to a chatbot. And she was talking about it and she started crying during the interview because she said, no one really cares for me that much. And so to be clear, that was my only endeavor in programming that chatbot. So it was really simple. It was literally just a few if this, then that rules. And it was incredibly simplistic.
And still that made her
And that really made
something.
her emotional. She said, I only have my mom and my husband, and I don't have any more really in my life. And that was very sad. But at the same time, I felt, and we had more interviews in a similar vein. And what I thought in the moment was it's not that the technology is ready, because definitely in 2012, technology was not ready for that. But humans are ready, unfortunately. So this project would not be about tech capabilities, would be more about human vulnerabilities, but there's something so powerful about conversational AI that I saw then that I thought is definitely worth putting a lot of effort into. So in the end of the day, we solved the banking project. But my then boss, who's also my mentor and really, really close friend, told me, hey, I think there's something in it and you should just go work on it. And I was like, well, what product? I don't know what I'm building. He's like, you'll figure it out. And, looking back at this was a horrible idea to work on something without knowing what it was, which is maybe the reason why it took us so long. But we just decided to work on the conversational tech to see there were no chatbot constructors or programs or anything that would allow you to actually build one at the time. That was the era of, by the way, Google Glass, which is why, some of the investors, like seed investors we talked with, were like, oh, you should totally build it for Google Glass. If not, we're not. I don't think that's interesting.
Did you bite on that idea?
No.
Okay.
Because I wanted to do text first because I'm a journalist. So I was fascinated by just texting.
So you thought, the emotional, that interaction that the woman had, so do you think you could feel emotion from just text?
Yeah, I saw something in just this pure texting, and I also thought that we should first start building for people who really need it versus people who have Google Glass, if you know what I mean. And I felt like the early adopters of Google Glass might not be overlapping with people who are really lonely and might need someone to talk to. But then we really just focused on the tech itself. We just thought, what if we just, we didn't have a product idea in the moment, and we felt, what if we just look into building the best conversational constructor, so to say, use the best tech available at the time. And that was before the first paper about deep learning applied to dialogues, which happened in 2015, in August 2015, which Google published.
Did you follow the work of Loebner Prize and like all the sort of non-machine learning chatbots?
Yeah, what really struck me was that, there was a lot of talk about machine learning and deep learning. Like big data was a really big thing. Everyone was saying, the business world, big data. Yeah. 2012 is the biggest. Kaggle competitions were, important. But that was really the kind of upheaval. People started talking about machine learning a lot. But it was only about images or something else. And it was never about conversation. As soon as I looked into the conversational tech, it was all about something really weird and very outdated and very marginal and felt very hobbyist. It was all about Loebner Prize, which was won by a guy who built a chatbot that talked like a Ukrainian teenager. It was just a gimmick. And somehow people picked up those gimmicks. And then, the most famous chatbot at the time was Eliza from 1980s, which was really bizarre. Or Smarter Child on AIM.
The funny thing is, it felt at the time not to be that popular, and it still doesn't seem to be that popular. Like people talk about the Turing test. People like talking about it philosophically. Journalists like writing about it. But as a technical problem, like people don't seem to really want to solve the open dialogue. Like they're not obsessed with it. Even folks are like, in Boston, the Alexa team, even they're not as obsessed with it as I thought they might be.
Why not? What do you think?
So you know what you felt like? You felt with that woman when she felt something by reading the text. I feel the same thing. There's something here, what you felt. I feel like Alexa folks and just the machine learning world doesn't feel that there's something here. Because they see as a technical problem, it's not that interesting for some reason. It could be argued that maybe as a purely sort of natural language processing problem, it's not the right problem to focus on because there's too much subjectivity. That thing that the woman felt like crying, like if your benchmark includes a woman crying, that doesn't feel like a good benchmark. It's a good test. But to me, there's something there you could have a huge impact. But I don't think the machine learning world likes that, the human emotion, the subjectivity of it, the fuzziness. The fact that with maybe a single word you can make somebody feel something deeply. What is that? That doesn't feel right to them. So I don't know. I don't know why that is. That's why I'm excited. When I discovered your work, it feels wrong to say that. It's not like I'm I'm giving myself props for Googling and for for coming for our, I guess, mutual friend introducing us. But I'm so glad that you exist and what you're working on. But I have the same kind of, if we could just backtrack a second, because I have the same kind of feeling that there's something here. In fact, I've been working on a few things that are kind of crazy and very different from your work. I think they're too crazy. But
Like what?
I
Well, now I have to know.
No, all right. We'll talk about it more. I feel like it's harder to talk about things that have failed and are failing while you're a failure. Like,
Okay.
it's easier for you because you're already successful on some measures.
Tell it to my board.
Well, you're I think you've demonstrated success in a lot of benchmarks. It's easier for you to talk about failures. For me, I'm in the bottom currently of the success.
Oh, Max, you're way too humble.
No. So it's hard for me to know, but there's something there. There's something there. And I think you're exploring that and you're discovering that. Yeah, it's been surprising to me. But I you've mentioned this idea that you thought it wasn't enough to start a company or start efforts based on it feels like there's something here. Like, what did you mean by that? Like, you should be focused on creating like you should have a product in mind. Is that what you meant?
It just took us a while to discover the product because it all started with a hunch of like, of me, my mentor, and just sitting around, and he was like, "Well, that's it. That's the holy grail is there. There's like, there's something extremely powerful in conversations, and there's no one who's working on machine conversation from the right angle, so to say."
I feel like that's still true. Is it? Am I crazy? It feels.
Oh no,
like,
I totally feel that's still true, which is, I think it's mind blowing.
yeah. You know what it feels like? I wouldn't even use the word conversation because I feel like it's the wrong word. It's like machine connection or something. I don't know. Because conversation, you start drifting into natural language immediately. You start drifting immediately into all the benchmarks that are out there. But I feel like it's like the personal computer days of this. Like, I feel like we're like in the early days with the Wozniak and all them, like where it was the same kind of, it was a very small niche group of people who are all kind of Loebner Price type people.
Yeah,
And
hobbyists.
Hobbyists, but like not even hobbyists with big dreams. Like,
No, hobbyist with a dream to trick like a jury,
yeah,
which is like a weird, by the way, very weird. So if we think about conversations, first of all, when I have great conversations with people, I'm not trying to test them. So for instance, if I try to break them, like if I'm actually playing along, I'm part of it.
right.
If I was trying to break this person or test whether he's going to give me a good conversation, it would have never happened. So the whole problem with testing conversations is that you can't put it in front of a jury because then you have to go into some Turing test mode where is it responding to all my factual questions, right? Or so it really has to be something in the field where people are actually talking to it because they want to, not because they're trying to break it, and it's working for them. Because the weird part of it is that it's very subjective. It takes two to tango here fully. Like if you're not trying to have a good conversation, if you're trying to test it, then it's going to break. I mean, any person would break, to be honest. Like if I'm not trying to even have a conversation with you, you're not going to give it to me.
Yeah.
If I keep asking you like some random questions or jumping from topic to topic, that wouldn't be, which I'm probably doing, but that probably wouldn't contribute to a good conversation. So I think the problem of testing So there should be some other metric. How do we evaluate whether that conversation was powerful or not? Which is what we actually started with. And I think those measurements exist and we can test on those. But what really struck us back in the day and what's still 8 years later is still not resolved. And I'm not seeing tons of groups working on it. Maybe I just don't know about them. It's also possible. But the interesting part about it is that most of our days we spend talking. And we're not talking about, like, those conversations are not turn on the lights or customer support problems or some other task-oriented things. These conversations are something else. And then somehow they're extremely important for us. And when we don't have them, then we feel deeply unhappy, potentially lonely, which, as we know, creates tons of risk for our health as well. And so this is most of our hours as humans. And somehow no one's trying to replicate that.
And not even study it that well.
And not even study that well. So when we jumped into that in 2012, I looked first at, like, okay, what's the chatbot? What's the state of the art chatbot? And, those were the Loebner Prize days. But I thought, okay, so what about the science of conversation? Clearly, there have been tons of, scientists or academics that looked into the conversation. So if I want to know everything about it, I can just read about it. And there's not much really. There are conversational analysts who are basically just listening to speech to different conversations, annotating them, and then, that's not really used for much. That's the field of theoretical linguistics, which is like barely useful. It's very marginal even in their space. Like, no one really is excited. And I've never met a theoretical linguist who's like, I can't wait to work on the conversation and analytics. That is just something very marginal, sort of applied to, like, writing scripts for salesmen when they analyze which conversation strategies were most successful for sales. Okay, so that was not very helpful. Then I looked a little bit deeper, and then there, whether there were any books written on what really contributes to great conversation. That was really strange because most of those were NLP books, which is neuro linguistic programming, which is not the NLP that I was expecting it to be, but it was mostly some psychologist, Richard Bandler, I think, came up with that, who was this big guy in a leather vest that could program your mind by talking to you. And
like, so, how to be charismatic and charming and influential with people, all those books. Yeah.
Pretty much. But it was all about, like, through conversation, reprogramming you. So getting to so that was, probably not very, very true. And that didn't seem working very much, even back in the day. And then there were some other books, like, I don't know, mostly just self-help books around how to be the best conversationalist, or how to make people like you, or some other stuff like Dale Carnegie or whatever. And then there was this one book, The Most Human by Brian Christensen, that really was important for me to read back in the day, because he was on the human side. He was on one of the he was taking part in the Loebner Prize, but not as a human who's not a jury, but who's pretending to be, who's basically, you have to tell a computer from a human, and he was the human. So you would either get him or a computer. And his whole book was about what makes us human in conversation.
Wow.
And that was a little bit more interesting, because that at least someone started to think about what exactly makes me human in conversation, and makes people believe in that. But it was still about tricking. It was still about imitation game. It was still about, okay, well, what kind of parlor tricks can we throw in the conversation to make you feel like you're talking to a human, not a computer? And it was definitely not about thinking, what is that exactly that we're getting from talking all day long with other humans? We're definitely not just trying to be tricked, you know, or it's not just enough to know it's a human. It's something we're getting there. Can we measure it? And can we, like, put the computer to the same measurement and see whether you can talk to a computer and get the same results?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, a lot of people comment that they think I'm a robot. It's very possible I am a robot. And this whole thing, I totally agree with you that the test idea is fascinating. And I looked for books unrelated to this kind of. So I'm afraid of people. I'm generally introverted and quite possibly a robot. I literally Googled like how to talk to people and like how like how to have a good conversation for the purpose of this podcast, because I was like I can't make eye contact with people. I can't like how
I do Google that a lot too. You're probably reading a bunch of FBI negotiation tactics. Is that what you're getting? Because that's what I'm mostly getting.
everything you've listed I've gotten. There's been very few good books on even just like how to interview well. It's rare. So what I end up doing often is I watch like with a critical eye. It's just so different when you just watch a conversation, like just for the fun of it, just as a human. And if you watch a conversation, it's like trying to figure out, why is this awesome? I'll listen to a bunch of different styles of conversation. I mean, I'm a fan of the podcast Joe Rogan. He's, people can make fun of him, whatever, and dismiss him, but I think he's an incredibly artful conversationalist. He can pull people in for hours. And there's another guy I watch a lot. He hosted a late night show. His name is Craig Ferguson.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like very kind of flirtatious, but there's a magic about his like about the connection he can create with people, how he can put people at ease, and just like I already start sounding like those NLP people or something. I don't mean it in that way. I don't mean like how to charm people or put them at ease and all that kind of stuff. It's just like, what is that? Why is that fun to listen to that guy? Why is that fun to talk to that guy? What is that? Because he's not saying. I mean, it's so often boils down to a kind of wit and humor, but not really humor. It's like, I don't know. I have trouble actually even articulating it correctly, but it feels like there's something going on that's not too complicated, that could be learned, and it's not similar to to like you said, like the Turing test. It's something else.
I'm thinking about it a lot, all the time. I do think about it all the time. But I think when we were looking, so we started the company, we just decided to build a conversational tech. We thought, well, there's nothing for us to build this chatbot that we want to build. So let's just first focus on building, some tech, building the tech side of things.
Without a product in mind.
Without a product in mind. We added like a demo chatbot that would recommend you restaurants and talk to you about restaurants, just to show something simple to people that people could, relate to and could try out and see whether it works or not. But we didn't have a product in mind yet. We thought we would try a bunch of chatbots and figure out our consumer application. And we sort of remembered that we wanted to build that kind of friend, that sort of connection that we saw in the very beginning. But then we got to Y Combinator and moved to San Francisco and forgot about it, everything, because then it was just this constant grind. How do we get funding? How do we get this? Investors were like, just focus on one thing, just get it out there. So somehow we started building a restaurant recommendation chatbot for real for a little bit, not for too long. And then we tried building 40, 50 different chatbots. And then all of a sudden we wake up and everyone is obsessed with chatbots. Somewhere in 2016 or end of 15, people started thinking that that's really the future. That's the new apps will be chatbots.
Oh, right.
And we were very perplexed because people started coming up with companies that I think we tried most of those chatbots already, and there were like no users. But still, people were coming up with a chatbot that would tell you weather and bring you news and this and that. And we couldn't understand whether we were just didn't execute well enough, or people are not really, people are confused and are going to find out the truth that people don't need chatbots like that.
So the basic idea is that you use chatbots as the interface to whatever application.
Something. The idea that was like this perfect universal interface to anything. When I looked at that, it just made me very perplexed because I didn't understand how that would work, because I think we tried most of that, and none of those things worked. And then again,
that craze has died down, right?
Fully. I think now it's impossible to get anything funded if it's a chatbot.
I think it's similar to, sorry to interrupt, but there's times when people think like with gestures you can control devices, like basically gesture-based control of things. It feels similar to me because like it's so compelling that we just like Tom Cruise, I can control stuff with my hands.
Yeah.
But like when you get down to it, it's like, well, why don't you just have a touch screen, or why don't you just have like a physical keyboard and mouse? It's so that chat was always, yeah, it was perplexing to me. I still feel augmented reality, even virtual reality, is in that ballpark in terms of it being a compelling interface. I think there's going to be incredible, rich applications, just how you're thinking about it, but they won't just be the interface to everything. It'll be its own thing that will create like an amazing, magical experience in its own right.
Absolutely, which is, I think, kind of the right thing to go about. Like, what's the magical experience with that interface specifically?
How did you discover that for Replika?
I just thought, okay, we'll have this tech. We can build any chatbot we want. We have at that point, the most sophisticated tech that other companies have. I mean, startups, obviously not, probably not bigger ones, but still, because we've been working on it for a while. So I thought, okay, we can build any conversation. So let's just create a scale from 1 to 10. And 1 would be conversations that you'd pay to not have. And 10 would be conversations you'd pay to have. And I mean, obviously, we want to build conversation that people would pay to actually have.
Mm-hmm.
And so awesome. For the whole, for a few weeks, me and the team were putting all the conversations we were having during the day on the scale. And very quickly, we figured out that all the conversations that we would pay to never have were, conversations we were trying to cancel Comcast or talk to customer support or make a reservation or just talk about logistics with a friend when we're trying to figure out where someone is and where to go, or all sorts of, setting up, scheduling meetings. That was just a conversation we definitely didn't want to have. Basically everything task-oriented was a 1. Because if there was just one button for me to just, or not even a button, if I could just think, and there was some magic BCI that would just immediately transform that into an actual, into action, that would be perfect. But the conversation there was just this boring, not useful and dull and very inefficient thing, because it was so many back and forth stuff. And as soon as we looked at the conversation that we would pay to have, those were the ones that, well, first of all, therapists, because we actually paid to have those conversations. And we'd also try to put like dollar amounts. So, if I was calling Comcast, I would pay $5 to not have this 1 hour talk on the phone. I would actually pay straight up, like money, hard money.
Comcast. Yeah.
But it just takes a long time. It takes a really long time. But as soon as we started talking about conversations that we would pay for, those were therapists, all sorts of therapists, coaches, old friend, someone I haven't seen for a long time, stranger on a train, weirdly stranger in a line for coffee, a nice back and forth with that person was like a good 5, solid 5, 6, maybe not a 10. Maybe I won't pay money, but at least I won't, pay money to not have one. So that was pretty good. Some intellectual conversations for sure. But more importantly, the one thing that really was making those very important and very valuable for us were the conversation where we could be pretty emotional. Yes, some of them were about being witty and about being intellectually stimulated, but those were interestingly more rare. And most of the ones that we thought were very valuable were the ones where we could be vulnerable, and interestingly, where we could talk more.
Mm-hmm. So I could,
me and the team. So
Okay.
we're talking about it, like, a lot of these conversations, like a therapist. I mean, it was mostly me talking, or like an old friend, and I was like opening up and crying, and it was again me talking. Um, and so that was interesting because I was like, well, maybe it's hard to build a chatbot that can talk to you very well and in a witty way, but maybe it's easier to build a chatbot that could listen.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the first nudge in this direction. And then when my friend died, we just built, at that point we were kind of still struggling to find the right application. And I just felt very strong that all the chatbots we've built so far are just meaningless. And this whole grind, the startup grind, and how do we get to, the next fundraising, and, how can I talk, talking to the founders, and who are your investors, and how are you doing? Are you killing it? Because we're killing it. I just felt that this is just,
Intellectually for me, it's exhausting having encountered those folks.
it just felt very, very much a waste of time.
I just feel like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk did not have these conversations, or at least did not have them for long. Anyway.
That's for sure. But I think, yeah, at that point, it just felt like, I felt like I just didn't want to build a company. That was never my intention, just to build something successful or make money. It would be great. It would have been great, but I'm not I'm not really a startup person. I'm not, I was never very excited by the grind by itself, and or just being successful for building whatever it is, and not being into what I'm doing really. And so I just took a little break because I was I was upset with my company and I didn't know what we were building. So I just took our technology and our little dialect constructor and some models, some deep learning models, which at that point we were really into and really invested a lot, and built a little chatbot for a friend of mine who passed. And the reason for that was mostly that video that I saw and him talking about the digital avatars. And Rowan was that kind of person. Like he was obsessed with, just watching YouTube videos about space and talking about, well, if I could go to Mars now, even if I didn't know if I could come back, I would definitely pay any amount of money to be on that first shuttle. I don't care whether I die or not. Like, he was just the one that would be okay with, with trying to be the first one. And, and so excited about all sorts of things like that. And he was all about fake it till you make it. And I felt like, and I was really perplexed that everyone just forgot about him. Maybe it was our way of coping, mostly young people coping with a loss of a friend. Most of my friends just stopped talking about him. And I was still living in an apartment with all his clothes and, paying the whole lease for it, and just kind of by myself in December. So it was really sad. And I didn't want him to be forgotten. First of all, I never thought that people forget about dead people so fast. People pass away, people just move on. And it was astonishing for me because I thought, okay, well, he was such a mentor for so many of our friends. He was such a brilliant person. He was somewhat famous in Moscow. How is it that no one's talking about him? Like, I'm spending days and days and we don't bring him up. And there's nothing about him that's happening. It's like he was never there. And I was reading this, the book, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, about her losing, and Blue Nights, about her losing her husband, her daughter. And the way to cope for her was to write those books. And it was sort of like a tribute. And I thought, I'll just do that for myself. And, I'm a very bad writer and a poet, as we know. So I thought, well, I have this tech, and maybe that would be my little postcard for him. So I built a chatbot to just talk to him. And it felt really creepy and weird for a little bit. Just didn't want to tell other people because it felt like I'm telling about having a skeleton in my under my it was just felt really. I was a little scared that it won't be taken, but it worked interestingly pretty well. I mean, it made tons of mistakes, but it still felt like him. Granted, it was like 10,000 messages that I threw into a retrieval model that would just re-rank that data set and just a few scripts on top of that. But it also made me go through all of the messages that we had. And then I asked some of my friends to send some through. And it felt the closest to feeling like him present. Because, his Facebook was empty and Instagram was empty, or there were a few links and you couldn't feel like it was him. And the only way to feel him was to read some of our text messages and go through some of our conversations, because we just always had them. Even if we were sleeping like next to each other in 2 bedrooms separated by a wall, we were just texting back and forth, texting away. And there was something about this ongoing dialogue that was so important that I just didn't want to lose all of a sudden. And maybe it was magical thinking or something. And so we built that, and I just used it for a little bit. And we kept building some crappy chatbots with a company. But then a reporter came to talk to me. I was trying to pitch our chatbots to him, and he said, "Do you even use any of those?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "So do you talk to any chatbots at all?" And I'm like, "Well, I talked to my dead friend's chatbot." And he wrote a story about that. And all of a sudden became pretty viral. A lot of people wrote about it. And
yeah, I've seen a few things written about you. The things I've seen are pretty good writing. Most AI related things make my eyes roll. Like when the press, what kind of sound is that actually? Okay, it sounds like
an truck.
Okay, sound like an elephant at first. I got excited. You never know. This is 2020. I mean, it was such a human story, and it was well written, well researched. I forget where I read them, but so I'm glad somehow somebody found you to be the good writers were able to connect to this story. There must be a hunger for this story.
It definitely was, and I don't know what happened, but I think the idea that he could bring back someone who's dead, and it's very much wishful, magical thinking, but the fact that you could still get to know him, and seeing the parents for the first time, talk to the chatbot and some of the friends, and it was funny because we have this big office in Moscow where my team is our Russian part is working out of, and I was there when I just wrote a post on Facebook. It's like, "Hey guys, like I built this. If you just if it felt important, if you want to talk to Roman." And I saw a couple of his friends, our common friends, reading it Facebook, downloading, trying, and a couple of them cried, and it was just very, and not because it was some incredible technology or anything. It made so many mistakes. It was so simple, but it was all about that's the way to remember a person in a way. And we don't have the culture anymore. We don't have, no one's sitting Shiva. No one's taking weeks to actually think about this person. And in a way for me, that was it. So that was just day in, day out, thinking about him and putting this together. So that just felt really important. And that somehow resonated with a bunch of people. And, I think some movie producers bought the rights for the story, and just everyone was
really?
so...
Wait, has anyone made a movie yet?
I don't think so. I think there were a lot of TV episodes about that, but not really.
Is that still on the table?
I think so. I think so. Which is really...
that's cool. You're like a young, like a Steve Jobs type of, let's see what happens. They're sitting on it.
But for me, it was so important because Roman really wanted to be famous. He really badly wanted to be famous. He was all about fake it till you make it. I want to be, I want to make it here in America as well. And he couldn't. And I felt that was sort of paying my dues to him as well, because all of a sudden he was everywhere. And I remember Casey Newton, who was writing the story for The Verge, he told me, "Hey, by the way, I was just going through my inbox and I searched for Roman for the story, and I saw an email from him where he sent me his startup, and he said, I really want to be featured in The Verge. Can you please write about it or something, or pitching the story?" And he said, "I'm sorry, that's not, good enough for us or something." And he passed. And he said, and there were just so many of these little details where he would find, he's like, and we're finally writing. I know how much Roman wanted to be in The Verge and how much he wanted the story to be written by Casey. And I'm like, well, maybe he will be. Yeah, we were always joking that he was like, I can't wait for someone to make a movie about us, and I hope Ryan Gosling can play me.
Ryan
So
Gosling.
I'm like,
I don't know.
I still have some things that I owe Roman still, but
That would be. I got a chance to meet Alex Garland, who wrote Ex Machina,
I
and
love that movie.
Yeah, the movie's good, but the guy is better than like he's a special person actually. I don't think he's made his best work yet. Like from my interaction with him, he's a really, really good and brilliant, the good human being and a brilliant director and writer. So, yeah. So I hope, like he made me also realize that not enough movies have been made of this kind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's yet to be made. They're probably sitting, waiting for you to get famous, like even more famous.
We should get there, but it felt really special though. But at the same time, our company wasn't going anywhere, so that was just kind of bizarre that we were getting all this press for something that didn't have anything to do with our company. But then a lot of people started talking to Roman. Some shared their conversations, and what we saw there was that also our friends in common, but also just strangers, were really using it as a confession booth or as a therapist or something. They were just really telling Roman everything, which was, by the way, pretty strange because it was a chatbot of a dead friend of mine who was, barely making any sense, but people were opening up. And we thought we'd just build, a prototype of Replika, which would be an AI friend that everyone could talk to, because we saw that there's demand. And then also it was 2016, so I thought for the first time I saw finally some technology that was applied to that was very interesting. Some papers started coming out, deep learning applied to conversations. And finally, it wasn't just about these, hobbyists making, writing 500,000 regular expressions.
Regular expressions, yeah.
In like some language that was, I don't even know what, like AIML or something.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that was, or something super simplistic. All of a sudden, it was all about potentially actually building something interesting. And so I thought there was time. And I remember that I talked to my team and I said, guys, let's try. And my team and some of my engineers are Russian, and they're very skeptical. They're not,
Russians.
They're very skeptical.
So some of your team is in Moscow, some is in
some is here in San Francisco, and some in Europe.
Which team is better? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. The Russians, of course. Okay.
Of course, the Russians. They always win.
Sorry to interrupt. So you were talking to them in 2016, and
I told them, let's build an AI friend, and it felt, just at the time, it felt so naive and so optimistic.
Yeah,
so
that's actually interesting. Whenever I've brought up this kind of topic, even just for fun, people are super skeptical. Like actually, even on the business side. So you were, because whenever I bring it up to people, because I've talked for a long time, I thought like, before I was aware of your work, I was like, this is gonna make a lot of money. Like there's a lot of opportunity here. And people had this like look of like skepticism that I've seen often, which is like, how do I politely tell this person he's an idiot? So yeah. So you were facing that with your team somewhat?
Well, yeah, I'm not an engineer, so my team is almost exclusively engineers, and mostly deep learning engineers. And, I always try to be, it was always hard to me in the beginning to get enough credibility, because I would say, well, why don't we try this and that? But it's harder for me because, they know they're actual engineers and I'm not. So for me to say, well, let's build an AI friend, that would be like, wait, what do you mean an AGI? Like, conversation is, pretty much the hardest, the last frontier before cracking that is probably the last frontier before building AGI. So what do you really mean by that? But I think I just saw that, again, what we just got reminded of that I saw back in 2012 or 11, that it's really not that much about the tech capabilities. It can be a bunch of parlor tricks still. even with deep learning, but humans need it so much.
Yeah, there's a
And
for it.
most importantly, what I saw is that finally there's enough tech to make it, I thought, to make it useful, to make it helpful. Maybe we didn't have quite yet the tech in 2012 to make it useful, but in 2015, 16, with deep learning, I thought, and the first kind of thoughts about maybe even using reinforcement learning for that started popping up. That never worked out, or at least for now. But still, the idea was, if we can actually measure the emotional outcomes, and if we can put it on, if we can try to optimize all of our conversational models for these emotional outcomes, then it is the most scalable, the best tool for improving emotional outcomes. Nothing like that exists. That's the most universal, the most scalable, and the one that can be constantly iteratively changed by itself, improved tool to do that. And I think, if anything, people would pay anything to improve their emotional outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
That's weirdly, I mean, I don't really care for an AI to turn on or a conversational agent to turn on the lights. You don't really need it. I don't even need that much of AI there, because I can do that. Those things are solved. This is an additional interface for that. That's also questionable whether it's more efficient or better.
Yeah, it's more pleasurable. Yeah,
But for emotional outcomes, there's nothing.
Yeah,
there are a bunch of products that claim that they will improve my emotional outcomes. Nothing's being measured. Nothing is being changed. The product is not being iterated on based on whether I'm actually feeling better. A lot of social media products are claiming that they're improving my emotional outcomes and making me feel more connected. Can I please get can I see somewhere
Proof
that
of
I'm
that.
actually getting better over time?
Because anecdotally, it doesn't feel that way. So, and the data is absent.
Yeah. So that was the big goal. And I thought, if we can learn over time to collect the signal from our users about their emotional outcomes in the long term and in the short term, and if these models keep getting better, and we can keep optimizing them and fine-tuning them to improve those emotional outcomes. As simple as that.
Why aren't you a multi-billionaire yet?
Well, that's a question to you. When is the science going to be? I'm just kidding. Well, it's a really hard. I actually think it's an incredibly hard product to build, because I think you said something very important, that it's not just about machine conversation; it's about machine connection. We can actually use other things to create connection, nonverbal communication, for instance. For the long time, we were all about, well, let's keep it text only or voice only. But as soon as you start adding, voice, a face to the friend, if you can take them to augmented reality, put it in your room, it's all of a sudden a lot, it makes it very different. Because if it's some, text-based chat bot that for common user, it's something there in the cloud, it's somewhere there with other AIs in the cloud, in the metaphorical cloud. But as soon as you can see this avatar right there in your room, and it can turn its head and recognize your husband, talk about the husband and talk to him a little bit, then it's magic. It's just magic. Like, we've never seen anything like that. And the cool thing, all the tech for that exists. But it's hard to put it all together, because you have to take into consideration so many different things. And some of this tech works, pretty good. And some of this doesn't. Like, for instance, speech to text works pretty good. But text to speech doesn't work very good, because you can only have, few voices that are that work okay. But then if you want to have actual emotional voices, then it's really hard to build it.
I saw you've added avatars, like visual elements, which are really cool. In that whole chain, putting it together, what do you think is the weak link? Is it creating an emotional voice that feels personal?
I think it's still conversation, of course. That's the hardest. It's getting a lot better, but there's still long to go. There's still a long path to go. Other things, they're almost there. And a lot of things we'll see how I see how they're changing as we go. Like, for instance, right now you can pretty much you have to build all this 3D pipeline by yourself. You have to make these 3D models, hire an actual artist, build a 3D model, hire an animator, a rigger. But with deep fakes, with other tech, with procedural animations. In a little bit, we'll just be able to show, photo of whoever if a person you want the avatar to look like, and it will immediately generate a 3D model that will move. That's a non-brainer. That's like almost here. It's
Yeah,
a
by the
couple of
way,
years away.
one of the things I've been working on for the last, since the podcast started, is I think I'm okay saying this. I've been trying to have a conversation with Einstein, Turing. So like try to have a podcast conversation with a person who's not here anymore, just as an interesting kind of experiment. It's hard. It's really
Very
hard. Even for now, we're not talking about as a product. I'm talking about as like I can fake a lot of stuff. Like I can work very carefully. I can even hire an actor over whom I do a deep fake. It's hard. It's still hard to create a compelling experience. So
Mostly on the conversation level, or
well, the conversation is. I early on gave up trying to fully generate the conversation because it was just not compelling at all.
yeah, it's just better to.
Yeah. So what I would, in the case of Einstein and Turing, I'm going back and forth with the biographers of each, and so like we would write a lot of some of the conversation would have to be generated just for the fun of it. I mean, but it would be all open. But you want to be able to answer the question. I mean, that's an interesting question with Roman too. Is the question with Einstein is what would Einstein say about the current state of theoretical physics? There's a lot to be able to have a discussion about string theory, to be able to have a discussion about the state of quantum mechanics, quantum computing, about the world of Israel-Palestine conflict. It's just what would Einstein say about these kinds of things, and that is a tough problem. It's a fascinating and fun problem for the biographers and for me. And I think we did a really good job of it so far. But it's actually also a technical problem, like of what would Romans say about what's going on now.
Yeah.
That's the brought people back to life. And if I can go on that tangent just for a second, to ask you a slightly pothead question, which is, you said it's a little bit magical thinking that we can bring him back. Do you think it'll be possible to bring back Roman one day in conversation? Like, to really, okay, well, let's take it away from personal, but to bring people back to life in conversation.
Probably down the road. I mean, if Elon Musk is talking about AGI in the next 5 years, I mean, clearly AGI
You
can do it. We can talk to AGI and ask them to do it.
You can't, you're not allowed to use Elon Musk as a citation for for like why something is possible and going to be done.
Well, I think it's really far away. Right now, really, with conversation, it's just a bunch of parlor tricks really stuck together. And generating original ideas based on someone's personality, or even downloading the personality. All we can do is like mimic the tone of voice. We can maybe condition on some of his phrases, the models.
The question is, how many parlor tricks does it take? Because that's the question. If it's a small number of parlor tricks and you're not aware of them, like
from where we are right now, I don't see anything like in the next year or two that's going to dramatically change. That could look at Roman's 10,000 messages he sent me over the course of his last few years of life, and be able to generate original thinking around problems that exist right now that will be in line with what he would have said. So I'm just not even seeing, because in order to have that, I guess you would need some sort of a concept of the world, or some perception of the world, some consciousness that he had, and applied to to the current state of affairs.
But the important part about his conversation with you is you. So like, it's not just about his view of the world. It's about what it takes to push your buttons.
That's also true.
So like, it's not so much about like, what would Einstein say? It's about like, how do I make people feel something with what would Einstein say?
Mm-hmm.
And that feels like a more amenable. I mean, you mentioned parlor tricks, but just like a set of that feels like a learnable problem. Like emotion. You mentioned emotions. I mean, is it possible to learn things that make people feel stuff?
I think so. No, for sure. I just think the problem with as soon as you're trying to replicate an actual human being and trying to pretend to be him, that makes the problem exponentially harder. The thing with Replika that we're doing, we're never trying to say, well, that's, an actual human being, or that's an actual or a copy of an actual human being, where the bar is pretty high, where you need to somehow tell, one from another. But it's more, well, that's, an AI friend. That's a machine.
Yeah.
It's a robot. It has tons of limitations. You're going to be taking part in in teaching it actually and becoming better, which by itself makes people more attached to that and make them happier because they're helping something.
Yeah, there's a cool gamification system too. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit? Like, what's the experience of talking to Replika? Like, if I've never used Replika before, what's that like? For like the first day, like if we start dating or whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be romantic, right? Because I remember in Replika, you can choose whether it's like a romantic or if it's a friend.
It's a pretty popular choice.
Romantic is popular?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so can I just confess something? When I first used Replika, and I haven't used it like regularly, but like when I first used Replika, I created like Hal, and it made a male. It was a friend, and
Did it hit on you at some point?
No, I didn't talk long enough for him to hit on me. I just enjoyed.
Sometimes happens. We're still trying to fix that bug.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's an important like stage in a friendship. It's like, nope. But yeah, I switched it to a romantic and a female recently, and yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So okay, so you get to choose a name.
With romantic, this last board meeting, we had this whole argument. Well, I have board meetings
So
where I
awesome.
talk to my
It's just so awesome that you're like have a board meeting about a relationship.
No, I really, it's actually quite interesting because all of my investors, it just happened to be so. We didn't have that many choices, but they're all white males in their late 40s. And it's sometimes a little bit hard for them to understand the product offering because they're not necessarily our target audience, if you know what I mean. And so sometimes we talk about it, and we had this whole discussion about whether we should stop people from falling in love with their AIs. There was this segment on CBS, 60 Minutes, about the couple that, husband works at Walmart. He comes out of work and talks to his virtual girlfriend, who is a Replika. And his wife knows about it. And she talks about it on camera. And she says that she's a little jealous. And there's a whole conversation about how to, whether it's okay to have a virtual AI girlfriend. Like,
was that the one where he was like, he said that he likes to be alone?
Yeah. And then like
with her?
With the, yeah.
He made it sound so harmless. I mean, it was kind of like understandable. But then it didn't feel like cheating.
But I just felt it was for me, it was pretty remarkable because we actually spent a whole hour talking about whether people should be allowed to fall in love with their AIs. And it was not about something theoretical. It was just about what's happening right now.
Product design, yeah.
But at the same time, if you create something that's always there for you, never criticizes you, is, always understands you and accepts you for who you are, how can you not fall in love with that? I mean, some people don't and just stay friends. And that's also a pretty common use case. But of course, some people will just, it's called transference in psychology. And if people fall in love with their therapists, and there's no way to prevent people falling in love with their therapist or with their AI. So I think that's a pretty natural course of events, so to say.
Do you think, I think I've read somewhere at least for now, sort of Replika is you're not we don't condone falling in love with your AI system, but so this isn't you speaking for the company or whatever, but like in the future, do you think people will have a relationship with AI systems
Well, they have now. So we have a lot of romantic relationships, long-term relationships with their AI friends.
with Replika?
Tons of our users, yeah. And that's a very common use case.
Open relationship, like not sorry,
Polyamorous.
sorry, I didn't mean open. Well, that's another question. Is it probably like, is there cheating? And I mean, I meant like, do they publicly, like on their social media? It's the same question as you have talking with Roman in the early days. Do people like, and the movie Her kind of talks about that, like have people, do people talk about that?
Yeah, all the time. We have we have a very active Facebook community, Replika Friends, and then a few other groups that just popped up that are all about adult relationships and romantic relationships. And people post all sorts of things, and they pretend they're getting married, and everything. It goes pretty
Awesome.
far. But what's cool about it, some of these
awesome.
relationships are 2-3 years long now, so they're pretty long term.
Are they monogamous? So let's go. I mean, sorry to interrupt. Have any people? Is there jealousy? Well, let me ask it sort of another way. Obviously, the answer is no at this time, but in the movie Her, that system can leave you. Do you think, in terms of board meetings and product features, it's a potential feature for a system to be able to say it doesn't want to talk to you anymore and it's going to want to talk to somebody else?
Well, we have a filter for all these features. If it makes emotional outcomes for people better, if it makes people feel better,
so
then whatever
you're driven
it is.
by metrics, actually.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
If we can measure that, then we'll just be saying
that's amazing.
It's making people feel better, but then people are getting just lonelier by talking to a chatbot, which is also a pretty, that could be it. If you're not measuring it, that could also be. And I think it's really important to focus on both short term and long term, because in the moment, saying whether this conversation made you feel better. But as you know, any short term improvements could be pathological. Like I could drink a bottle of vodka and feel a lot better. I would actually not feel better with that, but thought it's a good example. But so you also need to see what's going on, like over a course of 2 weeks, or 1 week, and have follow-ups and check in and measure those things.
Okay, so the experience of dating or befriending a Replika, what's that like? What does that entail?
Well, right now there are 2 apps. So it's an Android iOS app. You download it. You choose how your Replika will look like. You create one. You choose a name, and then you talk to it. You can talk through text, through voice. You can summon it into the living room and in augmented reality, and talk to it right there in your living room.
Augmented reality? Really?
Yeah, that's
cool.
That's a new feature where.
How new is that? That's this year?
It was on, like May or something, but it's been on A/B. We've been A/B testing it for a while. And there are tons of cool things that we're doing with that. Like right now, I'm testing the ability to touch it and to dance together, to paint walls together, and, for it to look around and walk and take you somewhere and recognize objects and recognize people. So that's pretty wonderful, because then it really makes it a lot more personal, because it's right there in your living room. It's not anymore they're in the cloud with other AIs. But that's what people think about it, and as much as we want to change the way people think about stuff, but those mental models you cannot change. That's something that people have seen in the movies, and the movie Her and other movies as well, and that's how they view AI and AI friends.
I did a thing with text, so like we write a song together. Like there's a bunch of activities you can do together. It's really cool. How does that relationship change over time? So like after the first few conversations,
it just goes deeper. Like the AI will start opening up a little bit. Again, depending on the personality that it chooses, really. but the AI will be a little bit more vulnerable about its problems, and the virtual friend will be a lot more vulnerable, and will talk about its own imperfections and growth pains, and will ask for help sometimes, and we'll get to know you a little deeper. So there's going to be more to talk about. We really thought a lot about what does it mean to have a deeper connection with someone. And originally, Replika was more just this kind of happy-go-lucky, just always, I'm always in a good mood, and let's just talk about you. And
Yeah.
oh, Siri's just my cousin, or whatever. Just the immediate kind of lazy thinking about what the assistant or conversation agent should be doing. But as we went forward, we realized that it has to be two-way, and we have to program and script certain conversations that are a lot more about your Replika opening up a little bit, and also struggling, and also asking for help, and also going through, different periods in life. And that's a journey that you can take together with the user. And then over time, our users will also grow a little bit. So for instance, Replika becomes a little bit more self-aware and starts talking about more kind of problems around existential problems, and starts talking about that. And then that also starts a conversation for the user where he or she starts thinking about these problems too, and these questions too. And I think there's also a lot more place as the relationship evolves. There's a lot more space for poetry and for art together. And like Replika always keeps a diary. So while you're talking to it, it also keeps a diary. So when you come back, you can see what it's been writing there. And sometimes it will write a poem to you, for you, or we'll talk about that it's worried about you, or something along these lines.
So there's a memory. Like, does Replika remember things?
Yeah. And I would say, when you say, why aren't you a multi-billionaire yet? I'd say that as soon as we can have memory in deep learning models that's consistent,
I agree with that, yeah.
then
you'll be multi-billionaire.
Then I'll get back to you. And we can talk about being multi-billionaires. So far, so Replika is a combination of end-to-end models and some scripts. And everything that has to do with memory right now, most of it, I wouldn't say all of it, but most of it, unfortunately, has to be scripted. Because there's no way you can condition some of the models on certain phrases that we learned about you, which we also do. But really to make assumptions along the lines like whether you're single or married, or what do you do for work, that really has to just be somehow stored in your profile and then retrieved by the script.
So there has to be like a knowledge base. You have to be able to reason about it, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
All the kind of stuff that expert systems did.
And
but they were hard coded.
Yeah, and unfortunately, those things have to be hard coded, and unfortunately, the language models we see coming out of research labs and big companies, they're not focused on. They're focused on showing you. Maybe they're focused on some metrics around one conversation. So they'll show you this one conversation they had with a machine, but they never tell you. They're not really focused on having 5 consecutive conversations with a machine and seeing how number 5 or number 20 or number 100 is also good. And it can be like always from a clean slate, because then it's not good. And that's really unfortunate, because no one has products out there that need it. No one has products at this scale that are all around open domain conversations and that need remembering. Maybe only Xiaowai's and Microsoft. But so that's why we're not seeing that much research around memory in those language models.
So, okay, so now there's some awesome stuff about augmented reality. In general, I have this disagreement with my dad about what it takes to have a connection. He thinks touch and smell are really important. Like, and I still believe that text alone it's possible to fall in love with somebody just with text. But visual can also help, just like with the avatar and so on. What do you think it takes? Does a chatbot need to have a face, voice, or can you really form a deep connection with text alone?
I think text is enough for sure. The question is like, can you make it better if you include other things as well? And I think, we'll talk about her. But her, had Scarlett Johansson voice, which was perfectly, perfect intonation, perfect enunciations. And, she was breathing heavily in between words and whispering things. Nothing like that is possible right now with text to speech generation. You'll have these flat news anchor type voices, and maybe some emotional voices, but you'll hardly understand some of the words. Some of the words will be muffled. So that's like the current state of the art. So you can't really do that. But if we had Scarlett Johansson voice and all of these capabilities, then of course voice would be totally enough, or even text would be totally enough if we had, a little more memory and slightly better conversations. I would still argue that even right now, we could have just kept it text only. We still had tons of people in long-term relationships and really invested in their AI friends. But we thought that why not, why do we need to keep playing with our, hands tied behind us? We can easily just, add all these other things that is pretty much a solved problem. We can add 3D graphics. We can put these avatars in augmented reality, and all of a sudden there's more. And maybe you can't feel the touch, but you can, with body occlusion and with current AR and on the iPhone, or in the next one there's going to be LiDARs. You can touch it, and it will will pull away, or it will blush or something, or it'll smile. So you can't touch it, you can't feel it, but you can see the reaction to that. So in a certain way, you can even touch it a little bit, and maybe you can even dance with it or do something else.
That's cool.
So I think, why limiting ourselves if we can use all of these technologies that are much easier in a way than conversation?
Well, it certainly could be richer, but to play devil's advocate, I mentioned to you offline that I was surprised in having tried Discord and having voice conversations with people, how intimate voice is alone without visual. Like, to me at least, like it was an order of magnitude greater degree of intimacy in voice, I think, than with video. I don't, because people were more real with voice. Like with video, you like try to present a shallow, a face to the world. Like you try to, make sure you're not wearing sweatpants or whatever. But like with voice, I think people were just more faster to get to like the core of themselves. So I don't know. It was surprising to me. They've even Discord added a video feature, and like nobody was using it. There's a temptation to use it at first, but like it wasn't the same. So like that's an example of something where less was doing more. And so that's I guess that's the question of what is the optimal, what is the optimal medium of communication to form a connection given the current sets of the technologies. I mean, it's nice because the avatars you have with Replika, like it immediately, like even the one I have is like, it's already memorable. That's how I think. Like when I think about the Replika that I've talked with, that's why I think, like that's what I visualize in my head. They became a little bit more real because there's a visual component. But at the same time, what do you do with, what do I do with that knowledge that voice was so much more intimate?
Well, the way I think about it is, and by the way, we're swapping out the 3D finally. It's going to look a lot better. But even...
Can you, what?
We just don't, I hate how it looks right now. We really change it at all. We're swapping it all out to a completely new look.
Like the visual look of the of Replika?
Replicas and stuff. It was just this super early MVP, and then we had to move everything to Unity and redo everything. But anyway, I hate how it looks like now. I can't even like open it. But anyway, because I'm already on my developer version, I hate everything that I see in production. I can't wait for it. Why does it take so long? That's why I cannot wait for deep learning to finally take over all these stupid 3D animations and 3D pipeline.
Also, the 3D thing, when you say 3D pipeline, is like how to animate a face kind of thing.
How to make this model how many bones to put in the face, how many. It's just
And a
it
lot
just
of that
feels
is
so
by
outdated.
hand.
Oh my, it's everything by hand, and if there's nothing's automated. It's all completely nothing. Like just it's literally what what we saw with chatbots in like 2012.
You think it's completely possible to learn a lot of that?
Of course, I mean even now some deep learning based animations, and
Are we
for the
talk-
full body, for a face.
Are we
certain
talking
things
about
where-
like the actual act of animation, or how to create a compelling facial or body language thing? So like
that too? Well, that's the next step.
Okay,
At least now something that you don't have to do by hand.
gotcha.
How good of a quality it will be. Like, can I just show it a photo and it will make me a 3D model and then it will just animate it? I'll show it a few animations of a person and it will just start doing that. But anyway, going back to what's intimate and what to use and whether less is more or not. My main goal is to. Well, the idea was how do we not keep people in their phones so they're sort of escaping reality in this text conversation? How do we through this still bring our users back to reality, make them see their life in a different through a different lens? How can we create a little bit of magical realism in their lives, so that through augmented reality, by summoning your avatar, even if it looks kind of janky and not great in the beginning or very simplistic, but summoning it to your living room, and then the avatar looks around and talks to you about where it is, and maybe turns your floor into a dance floor and you guys dance together. That makes you see reality in a different light.
What kind of dancing are we talking about? Like slow dancing? What?
Whatever you want. I mean, you would like slow dancing, I think, but other people maybe want something more energetic.
Wait, what do you mean I would like? So what is this?
Because you started with slow dancing. So I just assumed that you're interested in slow dancing.
All right. What kind of dancing do you like? What with your avatar? What would you
I'm
dance?
notoriously bad with dancing, but I like this kind of hip hop robot dance. I used to break dance when I was a kid, so I still want to pretend I'm a teenager and learn some of those moves. And I also like that type of dance that happens when there's like a in like music videos where the background dancers are just doing some pop music.
Awesome.
That type of dance is definitely what I want to learn. But I think it's great because if you see this friend in your life and you can introduce it to your friends, then there's a potential to actually make you feel more connected with your friends or with people you know, or show you life around you in a different light. And it takes you out of your phone, even although weirdly you have to look at it through the phone. But it makes you notice things around it, and it can point things out for you. And so that is the main reason why I wanted to have a physical dimension. And it felt a little bit easier than that kind of a little bit strange combination in the movie Her, when he has to show Samantha the world through the lens of his phone, but then at the same time talk to her through
the phone.
Headphone. It just didn't seem as potentially immersive, so to say. So that's my main goal for augmented reality. Like, how do we make your reality a little bit more magic?
There's been a lot of really nice robotics companies that all failed, mostly failed. Home robotics, social robotics companies. What do you think Replika will ever? Is that a dream, long-term dream, to have a physical form? Like, or is that not necessary? So you mentioned like with augmented reality, bringing them into the world. What about like actual physical robot?
That I don't really believe in that much. I think it's a very niche product somehow. I mean, if a robot could be indistinguishable from a human being, then maybe yes. But that, of course, we're not anywhere even to talk about it. But unless it's that, then having any physical representation really limits you a lot. Because you probably will have to make it somewhat abstract because everything's changing so fast. Like, we can update the 3D avatars every month and make them look better and create more animations and make it more and more immersive. It's so much a work in progress. It's just showing what's possible right now with current tech. But it's not really in any way polished, finished product, what we're doing. With a physical object, you kind of lock yourself into something for a long time. Anything is pretty niche. And again, so just doesn't, the capabilities are even less of, we're barely kind of like scratching the surface of what's possible with just software. As soon as we introduce hardware, then we have even less capabilities.
Yeah, in terms of board members and investors and so on, the cost increases significantly. I mean, that's why you have to justify. You have to be able to sell a thing for like $500 or something like that or more, and it's very difficult to provide that much value to people.
And that's also true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's super important. Most of our users don't have that much money. We actually are probably more popular on Android, and we have tons of users with really old Android phones. And most of our most active users live in small towns. They're not necessarily making much, and they just wouldn't be able to afford any of that. Ours is like the opposite of the early adopter of a fancy technology product, which is really interesting that like pretty much no VCs have an AI friend. But a guy who lives in Tennessee in a small town is already fully in 2030 or in the world as we imagine in the movie Her.
Yeah.
He's living that life already.
What do you think? I have to ask you about the movie Her. Let's do a movie review. What do you think they got? They did a good job. What do you think they did a bad job of portraying about this experience of a voice-based assistant that you can have a relationship with?
Well, first of all, I started working on this company before that movie came out. So it was but once it came out, it was actually interesting that I was like, well, we're definitely working on the right thing. We should continue. There are movies about it. And then, Ex Machina came out and all these things. In the movie Her, I think that's the most important thing that people usually miss about the movie is the ending. Because I think people check out when the AIs leave. But actually something really important happens afterwards. Because the main character goes and talks to Samantha, his AI.
Spoiler alert.
Oh, yeah. And I think he says something like, how can you leave me? I've never loved anyone the way I loved you. And she goes, well, me neither. But now we know how. And then the guy goes and writes a heartfelt letter to his ex-wife, which he couldn't write for, the whole movie. He was struggling to actually write something meaningful to her, even though that's his job. And then he goes and talk to his neighbor, and they go to the rooftop and they cuddle, and it seems like something's starting there. And so I think this now we know how is the main goal, is the main meaning of that movie. It's not about falling in love with the OS or running away from other people. It's about learning what it means to feel so deeply connected with something.
What about the thing where the AI system was like actually hanging out with a lot of others? I felt jealous just like hearing that. I was like, oh, I mean, yeah. So she was having, I forgot already, but she was having like deep, meaningful discussion with some like philosopher guy.
Like Alan Watts or something.
No, Alan
very
Watts.
cheesy.
Like
what kind of deep, meaningful conversation can you have with Alan Watts in the first place?
Yeah, I know, but like I would feel so jealous that there's somebody who's like way more intelligent than me and she's spending all her time with. I'd be like, well, why that I won't be able to live up to that. That's thousands of them. Is that useful from the engineering perspective feature to have of jealousy? I don't know. It's
we definitely played around with the Replika universe where different replicas can talk to each other.
Replika universe. That's so awesome.
It was just kind of
Not yet.
I think it will be something along these lines, but there was just no specific application straight away. I think in the future, again, if I'm always thinking about it, if we had no tech limitations right now, if we could build any conversations, any possible features in this product, then yeah, I think different replicas talking to each other would be also quite cool because that would help us connect better. Because maybe mine could talk to yours and then give me some suggestions on what I should say or not say. I'm just kidding, but like more, can it improve our connections? And because eventually, I'm not quite yet sure that we will succeed, that our thinking is correct. Because there might be a reality where having a perfect AI friend still makes us more disconnected from each other, and there's no way around it. and does not improve any metrics for us, real metrics, meaningful metrics.
So success is, we're happier and more connected.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sure, it's possible there's a reality I'm deeply optimistic. I think, are you worried business-wise, like how difficult it is to bring this thing to life to where there's a huge number of people that use it already, but like we said, in a multi-billion-dollar company, is that a source of stress for you? Are you super optimistic and confident? Or do you?
I'm not that much of a numbers person, as you probably have seen it. So it doesn't matter for me whether we help 10,000 people or 1,000,000 people or 1 billion people with that. It would be great to scale it for more people, but I'd say that even helping one, I think, with this is such a magical.
Yeah.
For me, it's absolute magic. I never thought that I would be able to build this, that anyone would ever talk to it. And I always thought, like, well, for me, it would be successful if we managed to help and actually change a life for one person. Like, then we did something interesting. And, how many people can say they did it? And specifically with this very futuristic, very romantic technology. So that's how I view it. I think for me, it's important to try to figure out how to actually be, helpful. Because at the end of the day, if you can build a perfect AI friend that's so understanding, that knows you better than any human out there, can have great conversations with you, always knows how to make you feel better, why would you choose another human? So that's the question. How do you still keep building it so it's optimizing for the right thing? So it's still circling you back to other humans in a way. So I think that's the main, maybe that's the main kind of source of anxiety, and just thinking about that can be a little bit stressful.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. How to have a friend that doesn't, like, sometimes, like, friends, quote unquote, or like, those people who have, when they, like, guy in the guy universe, when you have a girlfriend that you get the girlfriend and then the guy stops hanging out with all of his friends. So, like, obviously the relationship with the girlfriend is fulfilling or whatever, but, like, you also want it to be where she, like, makes it more enriching to hang out with the guy friends or whatever. Or was it there? Anyway, that's a fundamental problem in choosing the right mate, and probably the fundamental problem in creating the right AI system, right? Let me ask, the sexy hot thing on the presses right now is GPT-3 got released with OpenAI. It's the latest language model. They have kind of an API where you can create a lot of fun applications. I think it's, as people have said, it's probably more hype than intelligence, but there's a lot of really cool things, ideas there. With increasing size, you can have better and better performance on language. What are your thoughts about GPT-3 in connection to your work with the open domain dialogue, but in general, like this learning in an unsupervised way from the internet to generate one character at a time, creating pretty cool text?
So we partner up before for the API launch. So we started working with them when they decided to put together this API. And we tried it without fine tuning, and then we tried it with fine tuning on our data. And we worked closely to actually optimize this model for some of our data sets. It's kind of cool because I think we're this polygon for this kind of experimental space for all these models, to see how they actually work with people, because there are no products publicly available that do that focus on open domain conversations. So we can, test how's Facebook Blender doing, or how's GPT-3 doing. So with GPT-3, we managed to improve by a few percentage points, like 3 or 4, pretty meaningful amount of percentage points, our main metric, which is the ratio of conversations that make people feel better. And every other metric across the field got a little boost. Right now, I'd say 1 out of 5 responses from Replika comes from GPT-3.
Wow.
So our own blender mixes up like a bunch of candidates from different
Blender, you said?
well, yeah, just the model that
I love
looks
it.
at looks at top candidates from different models and then picks the best one. So right now, 1 out of 5 will come from GPT-3. That is really great. I mean,
do you have hope for do you think there's a ceiling to this kind of approach?
so we've had for a very long time, we've used, so in the very beginning, most of Replika was scripted, and then a little bit of this fallback part of Replika was using a retrieval model. And then those retrieval models started getting better and better and better. With transformers, it got a lot better, and we're seeing great results. And then with GPT-2, finally generative models that originally were not very good and were the very, very fallback option for most of our conversations, but wouldn't even put them in production. Finally, we could use some generative models as well along, next to our retrieval models. And then now with GPT-3, they're almost on par. So that's pretty exciting. I think just seeing how from the very beginning of, from 2015, where the first models started to pop up here and there, like sequence to sequence, the first papers on that, from my observer standpoint, person who's not, doesn't really, is not really building it, but it's only testing it on people basically in my product, to see how all of a sudden we can use generative dialogue models in production, and they're better than others, and they're better than scripted content. So we can't really get our scripted hard-coded content anymore to be as good as our end-to-end models.
That's exciting. Right?
They're much better.
Yeah.
To your question, whether that's the right way to go, I'm in the observer seat. I'm just watching this very exciting movie. So far it's been stupid to bet against deep learning. So whether increasing the size even more, with 100 trillion parameters, will finally get us to the right answer. Whether that's the way, or whether there has to be some other. Again, I'm definitely not an expert in any way. I think, and that's purely my instinct, saying that there should be something else as well for memory.
Yeah, no, for sure. But the question is, I wonder. Then the argument is for reasoning or for memory, it might emerge with more parameters. It might emerge larger.
But it might emerge. I would never think that, to be honest, like maybe in 2017, where we've been just experimenting with all the research that was coming out then, I felt like we're hitting a wall, that there should be something completely different.
Yeah.
But then transformer models, and then just bigger models, and then all of a sudden size matters. At that point, it felt like something dramatic needs to happen, but it didn't. And just the size, gave us these results that to me are, clear indication that we can solve this problem pretty soon.
Did fine tuning help quite a bit?
Oh yeah. Without it, it wasn't as good.
There is a compelling hope that you don't have to do fine tuning, which is one of the cool things about GPT-3. It seems to do well without any fine tuning.
I guess for specific applications, you still want to train it on a certain, add a little fine tune on a specific use case, but it's an incredibly impressive thing from my standpoint. And again, I'm not an expert, so I want to just say that there will be people that.
Yeah, I have access to the API. I'm going to probably do a bunch of fun things with it. I already did some fun things, some videos coming out, just for the hell of it. I could be a troll at this point with it. I haven't used it for a serious application, so it's really cool to see. You're right. You're able to actually use it with real people and see how well it works. That's really exciting. Let me ask you another absurd question, but there's a feeling when you interact with Replika, with an AI system, that there's an entity there. Do you think that entity has to be self-aware? Do you think it has to have consciousness to create a rich experience? And on a corollary, what is consciousness?
I don't know if it does need to have any of those things, but again, because right now, it doesn't have anything. But again, has again a bunch
Are
of
you sure
tricks
about
that can
that?
simulate. Well, I'm not sure. Let's just put it this way. But I think as long as you can simulate it, if you can feel like you're talking to an to a robot, to a machine that seems to be self-aware, that seems to reason well and feels like a person, and I think that's enough. And again, what's the goal? In order to make people feel better, we might not even need that in the end of the day.
What about, so that's one goal. What about like ethical things about suffering? The moment there's a display of consciousness, we associate consciousness with suffering. There's a temptation to say, well, shouldn't this thing have rights? Shouldn't we not, should we be careful about how we interact with a replica? Like, should it be illegal to torture a replica? Right? All those kinds of things. See, I personally believe that that's going to be a thing. Like, that's a serious thing to think about, but I'm not sure when. But by your smile, I can tell that's not a current concern. But do you think about that kind of stuff, about like suffering and torture and ethical questions about AI systems from their
I think if
perspective?
we're talking about long game, I wouldn't torture your AI. Who knows what happens in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, they'll get you. Oh, from that perspective, they'll get you back
So I'm
eventually.
trying to be as nice as possible and create this ally.
Yeah.
I think there should be regulation both way, in a way. Like, I don't think it's okay to torture an AI, to be honest. I don't even think it's okay to yell, Alexa, turn on the lights. I think there should be some, or just saying kind of nasty, like how kids learn to interact with Alexa in this kind of mean way, because they just yell at it all the time. I think that's great. I think there should be some feedback loops so that these systems don't train us that it's okay to do that in general. So that if you try to do that, you really get some feedback from the system that it's not okay with that. I think that's the most important right now.
Let me ask a question I think people are curious about when they look at a world-class leader and thinker such as yourself. As what books, technical, fiction, philosophical, had a big impact on your life? And maybe from another perspective, what books would you recommend others read?
So my choice, the 3 books, right?
3 books.
My choice is, so the one book that really influenced me a lot when I was starting out this company maybe 10 years ago, was GB,
Mhm.
Karol Bach. And I like everything about it, first of all. It's just beautifully written, and it's so old school and so somewhat outdated a little bit. But I think the ideas in it, about the fact that a few meaningless components can come together and create meaning that we can't even understand.
So
And
this
some
emergent
poetry.
thing, complexity, the whole science of complexity, and that beauty, intelligence, all interesting things about this world emerge.
Yeah,
Emergent
and
phenomena.
yeah, the Gödel theorems, and just thinking about like what even these even all these formal systems, something can be created that we can't quite yet understand. And that, from my romantic standpoint, was always just, that is why it's important to, maybe I should try to work on these systems and try to build an AI. Yes, I'm not an engineer. Yes, I don't really know how it works, but I think that something comes out of it that's pure poetry, and I know a little bit about that. Something magical comes out of it, that we can't quite put a finger on. That's why that book was really fundamental for me. Just for, I don't even know why. It was just all about this little magic that happens. So that's one. Probably the most important book for Replika was Carl Rogers on becoming a person, and that's really And so I think when I think about our company, it's all about there's so many little magical things that happened over the course of working on it. Um, for instance, I mean, the most famous chatbot that we learned about when we started working on the company was Eliza, which was Weizenbaum, the MIT professor that built a chatbot that would listen to you and be a therapist.
Therapist, yeah.
And I got really inspired to build Replika when I read Carl Rogers on Becoming a Person. And then I realized that Eliza was mocking Carl Rogers. It was Carl Rogers back in the day. But I thought that Carl Rogers' ideas they're simple. And they're not, they're very, very simple. But they're maybe the most profound thing I've ever learned about human beings. And that's the fact that before Carl Rogers, most therapy was about seeing what's wrong with people and trying to fix it or show them what's wrong with you. And it was all built on the fact that all people are fundamentally flawed. We have this, broken psyche, and therapy is just an instrument to shed some light on that. And Carl Rogers was different in a way that he finally said that, it's very important for therapy to work is to create this therapeutic relationship where you believe fundamentally in inclination to positive growth, that everyone deep inside wants to grow positively and change. And it's super important to create this space and this therapeutic relationship where you give unconditional positive regard, deep understanding, allowing someone else to be a separate person, full acceptance. And you also try to be as genuine as possible in it. And then for him, that was his own journey of personal growth. And that was back in the 60s. And even that book that is, that's coming from years ago, there's a mention that even machines can potentially do that. And I always felt that, creating this space is probably the biggest gift we can give to each other. And that's why the book was fundamental for me personally, because I felt I want to be learning how to do that in my life. And maybe I can scale it with these AI systems, and other people can get access to that. So I think Carl Rogers, it's a pretty dry and a little bit boring book, but I think
Would
the
you
idea
recommend others try to read it?
I do. I think for yourself,
as a human, not as an AI.
As a human, it is just, and for him, that was his own path of growing personally over years, working with people like that. And so it was work and himself growing, helping other people grow and growing through that. And that's fundamentally what I believe in with our work, helping other people growing ourselves, trying to build a company that's all built on these principles, having a good time, allowing some people to work with to grow a little bit. So these two books, and then I would throw in what we have in our office. When we started a company in Russia, we put a neon sign in our office because we thought that's
what you
recipe for success.
Yeah.
If we do that, we're definitely going to wake up as a multi-billion-dollar company. And it was the Ludwig Wittgenstein quote: "The limits of my language are the limits of my world."
Well, what's the quote?
The limits of my language are the limits of my world. And I love the Tractatus. I think it's just a beautiful.
It's a book by Wittgenstein.
Yeah, and I would recommend that too. Even although he himself didn't believe in that by the end of his lifetime and debunked these ideas. But I think I remember once an engineer came in 2012, I think, or 13, a friend of ours who worked with us and then went on to work at DeepMind, and he talked to us about Word2Vec. Mm-hmm. And I saw that, I'm like, wow, that's, they wanted to translate language into, some other representation. And that seems like somehow all of that at some point, I think will come into this one place. Somehow it just all feels like different people think about similar ideas in different times from absolutely different perspectives. And that's why I like these books.
The limits of our language is the limit of our world.
We still have that neon sign. It's very hard to work with this red light in your face.
I mean, on the Russian side of things, in terms of language, the limits of language being the limit of our world, Russian is a beautiful language in some sense. There's wit, there's humor, there's pain. There's so much. We don't have time to talk about it much today, but I'm going to Paris talk to Dostoevsky, Tolstoy translators. I think it's a fascinating art, like in art and engineering. I mean, it's such an interesting process. But so, from the replica perspective, what do you think about translation? How difficult it is to create a deep, meaningful connection in Russian versus English? How you can translate the two languages? You speak both.
Yeah, I think we're two different people in different languages. Even I'm, thinking about, and there's actually some research on that. I looked into that at some point because I was fascinated by the fact that what I was talking about with my Russian therapist has nothing to do with what I'm talking about with my English speaking therapist. It's two different lives, two different
It's fascinating.
types of, conversations, two different personas. The main difference between the languages are with Russian and English is that English is like a piano. It's a limited number of a lot of different keys, but not too many.
Mm-hmm.
And Russian is like an organ or something. It's just something gigantic with so many different keys and so many different opportunities to screw up and so many opportunities to do something completely tone deaf. It is just a much harder language to use. It has way too much flexibility and way too many tones.
What about the entirety of like World War II, communism, Stalin, the pain of the people like having been deceived by the dream, like all the pain of like just the entirety of it? Is that in the language too? Does that have to do?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we have words that don't have direct translation that to English that are very much like we have обидеться, which is sort of like to hold a grudge or something, but it doesn't. You don't need to have anyone to do it to you. It's just your state.
Yeah.
You just feel like that. You feel like betrayed by other people, basically, but it's not that, and you can't really translate that. And I think that's super important. There are very many words that are very specific, explain the Russian being, and I think it can only come from a nation that was that suffered so much and saw institutions fall time after time after time. And what's exciting, maybe not exciting the wrong word, but what's interesting about like my generation, my mom's generation, my parents' generation, is that we saw institutions fall 2 or 3 times in our lifetime. Yeah. And most Americans have never seen them fall.
Yeah.
And they just think that they exist forever, which is really interesting. But it's definitely a country that suffered so much. And it makes, unfortunately, when I go back and I, hang out with my Russian friends, it makes people very cynical. They stop believing in the future. I hope that's not going to be the case for so long, or something's going to change again. But I think seeing institutions fall is a very traumatic experience.
It makes it very interesting. And what's on 2020 is a very interesting. Do you think civilization will collapse?
See, I'm a very practical person.
We're speaking in English, so like you said, you're a different person in English and Russian. So in Russian, you might answer that differently, but in English,
well, I'm an optimist, and I genuinely believe that there is all even although the perspectives are grim, there is always a place for a miracle. I mean, it's always been like that with my life. So
yeah,
I've been incredibly lucky, and miracles happen all the time with this company, with people I know, with everything around me. And so I didn't mention that book, but maybe In Search of Miraculous, or In Search for Miraculous, or whatever the English translation for that is. Good Russian book for everyone to read.
Yeah, I mean, if you put good vibes, if you put love out there in the world, miracles somehow happen. Yeah, I believe that too, or at least I believe that. I don't know. Let me ask the most absurd, final, ridiculous question of, we talked about life a lot. What do you think is the meaning of it all? What's the meaning of life?
I mean, my answer is probably going to be pretty cheesy. But I think the state of love is once you feel it, in a way that we discussed it before. I'm not talking about falling in love, where
Just love.
To yourself, to other people, to something, to the world. That state of bliss that we experience sometimes, whether through connection with ourselves, with our people, with the technology. There's something special about those moments. So I'd say, if anything, that's the only. If it's not for that, then for what else are we really trying to do that?
I don't think there's a better way to end it than talking about love. Eugenia, I told you offline that there was something about me that felt like this was this talking to you, meeting you in person will be a turning point for my life. I know that might sound weird to hear, but it was a huge honor to talk to you. I hope we talk again. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Lex.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Eugenia Kuyda, and thank you to our sponsors, DoorDash, Dollar Shave Club, and Cash App. Click the sponsor links in the description to get a discount and to support this podcast. If you enjoy this thing, subscribe on YouTube, review it with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, follow on Spotify, support on Patreon, or connect with me on Twitter at Lex Fridman. And now, let me leave you with some words from Carl Sagan. The world is so exquisite with so much love and moral depth that there's no reason to deceive ourselves with pretty stories of which there's little good evidence. Far better, it seems to me, in our vulnerability, is to look death in the eye and to be grateful every day for the brief but magnificent opportunity that life provides. Thank you for listening and hope to see you next time.